Reconciliation Commission is that we educate Americans to the fact that they have been lied to by Donald Trump for the better part of 9 years, repeatedly, over and over and over and over again. Many of these lies are extraordinarily destructive, not just to our society, but to our democracy and our government. And that they acknowledge those lies. I mean, so what in your mind is the distinction? I mean, the Holocaust was a hell of an event, right? I mean, they killed something like 10 or 12 million people, 6 million Jews. I mean, I don't think you could not have the Nuremberg trials after the Holocaust. But Trump has not initiated a Holocaust. He's done some really terrible stuff. But, you know, we have not yet even reached the level of Hungary or Russia or arguably even Poland under Duda, you know, in terms of oppression. So at what point is it so bad that you have to do a Nuremberg trial instead of the equivalent of a Truth and Reconciliation Commission? Or do you see the two things mutually exclusive? Could we do both?
Sure. Let's do both, Tom. Let's have a lot of fun when this is over, all right? So we're going to have the Truth and Reconciliation for the good people. We can reach out to them. I'll say this from a legal point of view, because I was doing some research. You know, the U.S. is not a signatory to the International Court of Justice.
Correct.
But if you commit crimes in countries that are, you can be charged, even though you're not a national of those countries. El Salvador is a signatory to the International Court of Justice.
Oh, interesting.
If Donald Trump and Kristi Noem and Marco Rubio and Thom Hartmann commit crimes against humanity in El Salvador, but what they're doing by sending people there who have not been convicted of crimes, knowing that it's a death camp, then arguably they could be charged. Now, they won't be prosecuted until they leave U.S. soil, but there's only a few countries they can go to where they would not be the threat of arrest hanging over them at all times. So, look, this is a real thing that I want to see happen. I want to see the ICJ do an investigation. I want to see them charge Donald Trump if the evidence is there, and we're going to see. Look, if the worst of this is today and everything gets better, then maybe not. But every instinct I have tells me we're going to get worse, not better. And Donald Trump last night, Tom, at his rally last night, he showed images to the crowd of migrants coming off a plane in El Salvador, being roughed up by the guards, being their head forcibly shaved, being dragged, and the crowd cheered. Okay, the crowd cheered and began chanting USA. That is more bone-chilling than anything Donald Trump says. Yeah. He is priming them. He is getting them ready. The celebration of cruelty is part of who MAGA is. We all know that. That was very jarring what happened last night at that rally. I was just watching clips of it. I couldn't believe that. And again, that could be harkened back to something under Hitler's Germany. Yeah. To be blunt, it's very startling.
The other piece that you wrote at the Dean's Report, we're talking with Dean Obiala, the other piece that you wrote that struck me this week was about Trump's collapsing poll numbers. And what that, triggers for me in my mind is at what point do dictators typically take off the mask? When was it that Putin actually started arresting protesters? At what point did Viktor Orban start arresting people for posting against him on Facebook? And my sense of it is, and I haven't done the research to back this up, but I probably should and write a piece about it myself. But my sense of it is that they are essentially forced to take off the mask and start using violence against their own people when their popularity starts to slip and they see the very real possibility that they could lose power. What say you?
Tom, you're 100% right based on history. I just interviewed, and he's in Germany, he's a professor. He wrote a book. His name is Marcel Dursis, and he wrote a book about how tyrants fall and how nations could be saved. I just interviewed him from Germany yesterday. We're going to play on my show tomorrow night. Mm-hmm. And in the book, he makes the point that it's counterintuitive to some, but even tyrants and dictators want to be popular, or at least appear popular for the psychological advantage of people thinking, well, I can't oppose this person.
They need that perception of popularity to prevent protest against them.
And that's a big part of it. And what they do in the beginning, Tom, is exactly what Trump is doing.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the heartport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Criminology on Trump by Greg Barak. This is from the introduction. Criminology on Trump is about family business, habitual lawlessness, and the struggle for economic and political power. The central character, Donald Trump, is a con artist, a master gaslighter, and a shrewd racketeer. It is the story of how the Houdini of white-collar crime and the founder and CEO of the Trump Organization operated a criminal enterprise from within an incorporated organization beginning in 1980 and continuing up to and from within the bowels of the White House for 4 years. At the same time, it's the history of the causation of the social, psychological, and physical harms connected to the Donald and his associates before, during, and after the presidency. This book is also an account of the activities that Donald Trump pursued in order to obtain the power of Commander-in-Chief of the United States, what he then did with that power of the bully pulpit once he achieved it, and finally the lengths to which he would go to keep from losing that power. Lastly, this is the story of what many elected and appointed politicos did or did not do to acquire or to forfeit their individual shares of Trumpian power. This overall analysis of the underside of the rule of law begs the question, had the Donald not become the 45th president of the United States, would he, his children, or the Trump Organization have found themselves formal defendants and legal adversaries of the people of the state of New York? My answer unequivocally would have been no way. As of January 6, 2022, the question remains open as to whether Donald Trump, as the former president, or any of his family members will ever be indicted and prosecuted for criminal tax fraud and the other felonies, along with the Trump Organization, Inc., and its CFO, Alan Weisselberg. From the point of view of newsmaking, lawlessness, and equal justice, much of the popular discourse surrounding Trump has to do with competing narratives. The most reverberating of these has been the dueling apocalyptic narratives traversing both old and new media platforms alike. One narrative has to do with witch hunts, hoaxes, fake news, global elites, and the deep state engaging in a myriad of underworld and otherworld conspiracies to bring down Trump. The other narrative has to do with saving the U.S. democracy from authoritarianism, recovering law and order from the damage, chaos, and trauma of Trump, and restoring American normalcy without all of that political insanity. While these two narratives capture the cultural conflict, the diverse groups of people at work here and the rival social movements of incompatible interests, desires, and visions, neither speaks to the fundamental structural conditions that generate the divisiveness between these two narratives. Without ever addressing these structural relationships, the two sides will remain at loggerheads for some time to come. The medium is always, as always, is still the message. And so far in the 21st century, social media is the medium. At the same time, the weaponizing of racism, misogyny, hate, fear, intimidation, and violence vis-a-vis social media is neither new nor unique to the United States. These socio-cultural expressions of the contradictions of patriarchy, neocolonialism, and capitalism have been around since the nation's inception. Today's Proud Boys are the contemporary versions of New England churchmen in the 1700s, the Klan riders of the 1800s, or the fervent followers of Joseph McCarthy in the 1950s. Likewise, the anti-critical race theory politicians of today that do the bidding for white minority rule and racial discrimination are very much the same as John C. Calhoun fronting for the rich plantation owners during the antebellum South. The primary differences between the not-so-distant past of the last 75 years and the present have to do with the disbursements of the accumulation of capital. From post-World War II until around 1974, the United States experienced close to 3 decades of unparalleled upward social mobility, as well as a rapidly expanding middle class. However, since the mid-1970s to 2022, there's been a steady increase in economic inequality, a shrinking middle class, and downward social mobility for many. Thus, the contemporary bipartisan erosion of the liberal capitalist consensus in the United States is not the primary cause of our present democratic crisis, but it is rather symptomatic of a much broader problem that neither the Republicans, as a whole, nor most of the Democrats are willing to accept. The book, continuing. I'm referring to the inability of our bourgeois democratic system to resolve the contradictions of a political economy that promises the American dream to one and all and yet caters to the richest 1% and provides suitably for the upper 10%. In other words, our country's present-day conflicts over identity politics, government failures, neoliberal policies, right-wing intransigencies, and climate change not only predate Donald Trump and Trumpism, but they are all fundamentally driven by the unrelenting and expanding political economy of structural inequality. What makes this Trump book different from the others is that it is the only one grounded in the scientific study of crime and social control. Criminology focuses on the pathology of harmful acts and the cultural construction of both crime and punishment. The book is Criminology on Trump by Greg Barak. Greg Barak, by the way, is an expert in criminology, as you might guess.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
An airplane knows with roaring confidence how to hold in his heart and raise up high above. An airplane knows with daring assurance when to take off and not stop until our destination's reached. Because of all of that mentioned or not, I put my trust in that and keep my dreams flying. And that is Flying by Megan Zhao. And I am Jefferson Smith sitting in for Thom Hartmann. This is the Thom Hartmann Show. Honored to be with you. I put my trust in the airplane as long as there is a regulatory structure to assure that our airplanes are in fact trustworthy. We now know that there was a 90 seconds might not sound like a ton of time. If I went silent for 90 seconds, you would turn this channel even more quickly than you might have when you heard my voice instead of Tom's. If I went silent for 90 seconds, the producer of this program would start making noise towards me, let's within 20. With 70 seconds left, what are you? By 90 seconds, they'd have somebody else sitting in this chair. And that's just this show. We'll do news with my dad today. My dad is a pilot. He's not flying anymore. He's 89 years old. His 90th birthday is week after next. But news with my dad, maybe therefore, news with my dad is a great segment. We'll have that later today. And I will ask him the relevance of 90 seconds when one is on approach. Anybody who is watching Nathan Fielder's The Rehearsal will be aware of the importance of every single second, not just if you're Sully Sullenberger. And we know that there was 90 seconds where the air traffic control system could not reach the airplane. And that has nothing to do with now two $60 million aircrafts that fell off the sides of boats. And these are not our only airplane challenges. These are becoming not isolated incidents. Shout out to Truth Out to the shout out. Headline: another DC plane collision puts Trump and Musk's FAA cuts in the spotlight. Don't they just? This is what happens when you tear down America. Now, Trump wanted to pivot and, like anything, blame it on the previous administration. But we know that dog won't hunt. We know that's ridiculous, not only because Donald Trump's the president, but also because the FAA cuts happened because of Trump. Also because the undermining of the regulatory structure, the undermining of the actual safety of United States citizens. Not the fake safety, not this, oh, look at El Salvador because maybe there's a Salvadoran who might live within 22 miles of you. But actually the safety of hundreds and thousands and tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands and millions of Americans who fly every year, every month, every day, that stuff doesn't just fix itself. That in fact, we built our public structures so that we could trust those public and private structures. Much of the growth of the American economy was based and is based on that trust. I've thought about that so much over the last 3 months. I've thought about it so much since the last time I had a chance to talk to you, and it's an honor to have a chance to be with you again. Call-in line, by the way, is 202-808-9925. 202-808-9925. What are the areas where we are tearing down America? And when I say we, I am being charitable. What are the areas where this White House, this Congress, this Republican Party, this right-wing movement, this Project 2025, this Agenda 47, this Heritage Foundation, this conglomeration of anti-American, anti-democracy, anti-public structures, anti-social systems are collaborating and conspiring to tear down? What are the areas of America that are getting torn down that are of concern to you? Call-in number here is 202-808-9925. And one of them for me is the FAA. And not only because I fly, and not only because my dad used to fly lots, and not only because lots of Americans fly all the time, also because it is emblematic. Because this is the kind of thing that happens and it's worth dwelling on. It's worth getting to the basic case. One of my concerns over the past, not 1 or 2 years, but 1 or 2 decades, has been a shared assumption among too much of the chattering class, too big a sector of the donors who drive a lot of political consultant decision-making, too many of the elected officials, including many I support, too many of the well-paid and large platformed members of the media, is assuming some agreement, assuming some consensus about some basic principles. So much so they just call them norms. Like they're a guy walking into the bar at Cheers to say hello to Sam Malone. Everybody says, norm. I'm not trying to say norms. I'm trying to say principles. And just thinking, norms. We just got to keep things normal. Meanwhile, powerful forces are trying to undermine normal. Meanwhile, normal isn't working for too many Americans. So when they say, hey, let's keep things normal, they say, are we sure we want to keep things normal? But there's an assumption of remaining agreement, remaining consensus around core principles of what has made this country great when it has been. And rather than rebuilding the case for, rebuilding the argument for, rebuilding the majority or supermajority or consensus for, those fundamental principles, I didn't just say norms, we kind of assume them. As if all we have to do is say democracy. We got to save democracy. And that's enough. Because of course everybody agrees with democracy. I certainly do. I am a democracy loyalist. It's one of my first values. I'm not a democracy fundamentalist. I don't think it works in all cases, but I'm a democracy loyalist. And at the same time, even I don't think we can just assume everybody's down. Everybody's cool with it. Everybody's ready to rock. I don't think we can. That we think that people will just be roughly cool with and are in support of a regulatory state, a set of systems by which public safety is assured, not only because somebody gets arrested at the back end or sued at the back end, but because at the front end, we make it less likely that people are hurt. That we worry about not only downstream impacts, but upstream causes. We can't just assume that. We can't just assume consensus around the Great Society and the New Deal. That not only is FDR dead, so are the people who elected him, and so are the voters who voted for him almost entirely. And thank you for those of you who are listening to this program and still around. Same thing goes for LBJ. And why do I say LBJ? Because but for the Vietnam War, big but, domestically one of the most impactful presidents ever. And not because he was impactful tearing down America. You know who else is impactful? Donald J. Trump. Impactful because he is brick by brick working with people smarter than he is, working with institutions who've wanted to do this for decades, who after Richard Nixon was taken down, have been working so hard to rebuild the communications apparatus and the communications culture in this country. They've been champing in the bit and willing to sign a deal with the devil, willing to collaborate with a president, previously a candidate for president, who they knew was compromised, who they knew was not trustworthy, who they were willing to pretend was a Christian even though they knew he didn't read the Bible and couldn't name a single passage, because they had this huge priority, a shared mission to tear down key pieces of America. But it's not without cost, because this stuff just doesn't happen itself. There's a reason it got done. It didn't get done. We didn't build safety regulations because of self-dealing corruption. Of course, there are deep priorities to try to improve the regulatory state, to try to improve the systems by which we govern ourselves. It has been something that I have been, if not thumping the table, tapping the table for a couple of decades. We've got to improve governmental systems. I've wanted a more efficient government since before Elon Musk took that term and used it as a cloak for tearing it down. But there's a reason we've got it. And we've seen it at Boeing. And we've seen it when we lost a door off an Alaska Airlines flight. And we see it when systems go down. It's that if everything is run by rational utility maximization, if everything is run for the primary purpose of extracting every ounce of profit that can be extracted, if that is our God upon which to which we worship, if that is the altar upon which we pray, if that is the ultimate value of this country, some things will break. It'll drive some action. But some things will break. Because if that is your primary purpose, then you don't have to be long-term viewed. You don't have to worry about the reputation of your apparatus all that long, because eventually we're all gone. And all you got to do is fool people long enough to get yours and to get rich. And to make sure that behind a corporate structure, behind your lawyers, behind the protections that have been more and more built to surround great wealth over the last decades, oh well, it wasn't your door on that airplane. You weren't in the airplane when you had 90 seconds of silence. This ain't just about airplanes. We've got to figure out how not to tear down America and or how to build the network and the collaboration system so that we can rebuild it. And that's why I'm grateful to be here and why I'm grateful that you are here. Call in number 202-808-9925. I'm Jeff, you're you, this is your show. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
This is also Thank You Thursday. If you got something public structure you want to shout out for, please do call in. Teresa from Bellevue, you are on the air. Thanks for calling.
Hi, Jefferson. Hey, that was a genius riff opening. I just loved it. I'm just going to piggyback a little bit onto what you said before my topic real quick. You know, you can always measure the cost of doing something. That's always a concrete, number. But to measure the cost of not doing something is a lot trickier.
Yeah. Yes.
So to not fund the FAA, I mean, we don't really know that number, but we find out afterwards what that number was.
Yes, it's hard. It's such a great point. Your point is such a great point because imagine, because I don't think that there's evil automatons making all decisions. Imagine you and I were sitting in a corporate boardroom. Imagine you and I were sitting around the budget making table and we're looking at our costs and we're looking at the negotiations we're going to have to make with union members and we're thinking about the shared profits that we're going to have. And that's our job. And we're looking at, hey, this is how much is spent on safety. And you weren't sure how much you should spend. And spending more on marketing, spending more on sales, cutting down on production costs, by the way, another way of saying safety.
Yes.
That's a way to build profit, and you wouldn't know where to go. And so if there wasn't a system by which to ensure that you invested in that, the very rational thing to do would be to invest less. Your point is so good.
Exactly. Yes, and then just one other quick point I was going to make on my main point was, all these billionaires are insulating themselves from, apocalypse and their bunkers and all this other stuff and their money. But that's only as good as the rule of law because, all their stocks are based on contract law. Their bunkers are based on property rights. Their physical protection is based on, laws against assault and battery.
Yeah.
So if they start chipping away at all the rules of law, I mean, the mobs are coming for them and there's nothing that they can do about it.
Teresa, I appreciate the call. Thank you so much from Bellevue, and thanks to everybody in the Washington area who listens to the show and around the country. I'll say two things. One, yeah, there is, and I'll quote Warren Buffett, and it does sadden me that he just left his post, not because I think we should worship on his altar, but at least among billionaires, at least he has offered some elements of wisdom, including the following one. Also, shout out to Greg Popovich, who stepped down as coach of the San Antonio Spurs. And it feels like the timing of this stuff is cosmically a bummer. But let me cite Buffett on this. When he said, and he was basically making the case for why we should invest in public structures to some degree. He said, because if I'd been born in East Peru, I wouldn't be worth 2 red dimes. He might have said pennies. He might have said 1. I don't remember exactly the denomination and how many of those denominations there were. But that the systems by which we've governed ourselves have put us in a position for great wealth in this country. And it's not only a cost center, it's also been the basis of big benefit centers. But here's the other one. That is there. And if you're Peter Thiel, if you're Yarvin, if you're these folks who are strategizing, well, what would it be like? Heck, if you're Musk, if you're Zuckerberg, what would it be like if we were untethered from democracy? What would it be like if we didn't need a republic? Thanks to Republicans. I don't really want to find out. I do believe there is a race. There's a race to reclaim the republic before we have full-on autocracy worldwide. I don't want to get people freaked out, but I do think that's a tension to be considering. We'll be right back. It's Thom Show.
Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. It's the Great Revenge. Trump's Orwellian America is taking shape. The key to it was this insane executive order titled Ending the Weaponization of the Federal Government. And basically what it does is it sets up the weaponization of the federal government. It proclaims that the Biden administration was, using the Justice Department to go after Trump people and Republicans, and it does it in a way that basically rationalizes they're doing the same thing. This is a absolute danger to our republic. This executive order and Trump's assertions around it. And you can read all about it. There's a whole op-ed about it titled The Great Revenge, Trump's Orwellian America Takes Shape, over at HartmannReport.com. Get ready for the investigations, the arrests, and the show trials. HartmannReport.com. Check it out.
We are back. Let us go to Susan from Caldwell, Idaho. You are on the air, Susan.
Hi, Jefferson. Welcome back. Kudos to your father as a career pilot. I'd like to bring everybody's thoughts back to sequestration, that 10-year program of forced federal spending cuts that was applied to President Obama after the high cost of bailing out the financial system of the 2009 financial failure. Dollar for dollar cut for every possible dollar that would bump up our debt, our national debt. This is why the FAA is still using 40-year-old tech in their towers and their trade codes. This is absolutely why. And not even that. In my area, there's 7 national forests in the state of Idaho. 3 are in my general area where I roam around. In one of them, the Sawtooth, 20 years ago, there were 20 forest rangers in that forest. This year, in time for DOJ to come through and terminate 50% of the staff, there were 2 for an entire forest. That includes a fish hatchery, okay? This is why the FAA cannot buy or upgrade systems.
Yeah.
There was 10 years of sequestration. It only ended in 2023. Please, let's blame the Republicans for this. They foisted that on President Obama.
Oh, Susan, thank you so much for the call. Appreciate it. It is, and here's part of the dynamic that's the problem. If you don't restore your bridges, and I don't mean tearing existing bridges down and building big highways. That's not what I mean. I just mean bolstering them after 100 years or so to make sure they don't topple in an earthquake or some other well, I guess there's no other seismic problem other than an earthquake, but some other thing that is strong enough to shake down a bridge. If you do not bolster your bridge, let's say you're the President of the United States, let's say you're governor, let's say you're mayor, let's say you're a legislative body, it is very unlikely that that bridge will fall down while you are the mayor, the president, or the governor, or the member of Congress. So it's an easy thing not to invest in. But later on, it's a real bummer. You won't be held accountable, but people will pay the cost. We've got to be thinking about public structures with future generations in mind, and maybe even just future years in mind. We're reaping the whirlwind right now from underinvestment. Thanks, Republican Party. We'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
If anybody thinks that underinvestment in public structures is the way we will make them better, please call in. Let's have that debate. I don't think that your argument will last very long.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Hidden History of Big Brother in America, How the Death of Privacy and the Rise of Surveillance Threaten Us and Our Democracy. This is from the introduction, titled The Big Picture of Social Control versus Democracy. This book deals with 2 very large and often amorphous concepts, privacy and surveillance in the context of government and the marketplace. Both concepts have undergone changes over the millennia of recorded human history, and those changes have dramatically sped up and expanded over the past few centuries, starting with the widespread use of the printing press in the mid to late 15th century, when books and newspapers began to proliferate across Europe, and in the rest of the civilized world by the end of the 17th century, civilized in quotes. The development of radio, television, and the internet in the 20th century heightened the need to define more clearly what both concepts meant and how they applied both to governments, the public sector, and to individual and corporate players, the private sector. The thought police and Big Brother are terms introduced into the popular lexicon by George Orwell in his novel 1984. Big Brother was the overweening, all-powerful government of Orwell's novel, and the thought police were those who managed to burrow so deeply into every citizen's behavior, speech, and even thoughts that they could control or punish behavior based on the slightest deviations from orthodoxy. Orwell was only slightly off the mark. Big Brother types of government and thought police types of social control are now widespread in the world and incompatible with democracy, as I'll show in more detail later in the book. Most concerning for Americans and citizens of other democratic nations, in quote, the mentality of both has heavily infiltrated both American government and corporate sectors, reaching so deeply into the day-to-day details of our lives that the techniques and technologies they use can and do not only control, but predict our behavior. The goals of those who violate privacy and use surveillance is almost always social control and behavior modification. Setting aside pure voyeurism, these are the areas where money is made, power is accumulated, and political or business goals are reached. And whether they are of government or of corporate Big Brother, the goals are largely the same and consistent with those just mentioned. Secrets are now for government and giant corporations to know and hold, but not for average people. And they're used by Big Brother to both acquire and hold power. J. Edgar Hoover had secrets to hide, for example, so he knew well their power. A gay man at the pinnacle of American power for most of his life, the FBI director knew that in many U.S. states, he and his lover, Clyde Tolson, could be prosecuted and sent to prison for their private, consensual behavior. Yet Hoover and Tolson lived together, and their relationship was an open secret among Washington's cognoscenti. I still remember a beautiful summer day in Ireland, Louise and I sitting in the living room of author Anthony Summers and his wife Robin, as they described to us the shocking details of Hoover's life and abuses of power they'd uncovered writing Official and Confidential, The Secret Life of J. Edgar Hoover. That books like Summers weren't published until after Hoover's death is a striking testimonial to the power of surveillance and the blackmail material it can produce to keep powerful people's secrets hidden even from the world's best investigative journalists. Every politician or reporter of any consequence knew that Hoover had a file on him. They were almost all men back then, and powerful men at that time were far more likely to harbor salacious secrets, ensuring Hoover an unbroken hold over the FBI from its founding in 1935 to his 1977 death. But Hoover didn't use his massive FBI surveillance powers just to cow politicians and reporters. He was also interested in advancing policies close to his heart. A dedicated white supremacist running an FBI where all meaningful power was held in white hands throughout his life, Hoover, or an underling at his behest, famously sent FBI surveillance tapes of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. having an extramarital affair to the civil rights leader himself, implying that they'd next go to his wife and the public if he didn't commit suicide. Hoover also spent his entire career downplaying the role of Italian organized crime in the United States because, among other things, mafia godfather Santo Trafficante had the goods on his sexual orientation and regularly hosted him and Tolson for gambling junkets. When, in 1961, Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy overruled Hoover and began prosecuting the mob, with the number of cases brought shooting up from dozens annually to over 700 a year in the early 1960s, the mafia backlash eventually destroyed the Kennedy dynasty. There's a more modern story of how surveillance and invasions of privacy have impacted American politics. The rise to the presidency of serial rapist, wannabe fascist, and crooked businessman Donald Trump. The biggest big brother of the corporate world, Facebook, had for years been compiling massive troves of personal data on Americans, even Americans without a Facebook account, as any page with a Facebook logo on it can send your browsing activity back to Facebook. And sometime in the mid-2010s, Cambridge Analytica hired a data scientist to put together an app that could suck down that data without Facebook's knowledge. Cambridge once bragged that they ended up with more than 4,000 data points on each of 230 million Americans. The book, The Hidden History of Brother in America, How the Death of Privacy and the Rise of Surveillance Threaten Us and Our Democracy, by Thom Hartmann. Did you know that every weekday we send out an email before the show giving you all the topics coming up so you can be fully informed and ready to interact with our program? Or that after the show we send out Sue's Stack, a list of every topic I've discussed along with clickable hot links to every source of information I've shared with you on the air? It's all completely free and available over at thom.tv, THOM.tv. Check it out.
Couple big things today, including understanding what is happening as the tearing down of America. Not controversy, not Doge, not even just Project 2025, but as a concerted effort to tear down fundamental public structures that will make this country weaker, is already making this country weaker, making this country worse. I think making it worse for everybody, certainly making it worse for somewhere between 60 and 90% of Americans. And on the flip side, it's Thank You Thursday. Anything you're grateful for? And it might be a public structure. It might be, wow, I used to really like Safe Milk. That was cool. I liked it when there were good milk inspections, and so when I drank it, I didn't need to be a milk expert. I just kind of knew it's probably going to be all right. I was thinking about that when I was on a trip to Mexico, and I was in a store, and the person I was with wasn't sure they wanted to buy aspirin there. Wasn't sure. I said, "Well, I got some I bought in America back home," and I thought about why. And this person, I don't think it's because they didn't think that people in Mexico could make or sell aspirin. I actually thought about it. I said, why do they trust what they buy in a drugstore in the United States? I think there's a lot of reasons. I think because we have a wealthy economy. I think because we have some pretty strong manufacturing standards. I think because we have some pretty smart people. I think there's a lot of reasons. I think wealth is one of those reasons. I think skill and ability for people engaged in their industries and their crafts, I think that's another good reason. I'm going to tell you another. Is because we have this basic confidence that there are rules that have to be followed before that aspirin gets to the shelf. And if those rules aren't followed, there are lawyers who will sue the company who did it. Not only the invisible hand of the market will make sure the aspirin is safe and rely upon the reputation of the aspirin company, because word can travel slow, particularly if the media is owned in too few hands and is paid in significant part by the company who's making the aspirin. But that we know that there are public structures in place to make it more likely that I'm going to be safe when I buy that aspirin. And see, I'm saying that's not just good for you. That's not just good for the person taking the aspirin. That's actually been good for aspirin makers, even if they have forgotten it over the last 40 years. It's actually been good for commerce overall that we've been able to trust, not only based on advertisements, whose goal is not truth, its goal is acquisition and persuasion, but there are some systems that are based on shared principles, outcomes other than just profit maximization. It's actually been good for profit maximization. That we have to we can't just assume that we agree that enlightened self-interest is any more a supermajority or consensus view. We can't just assume that homeschooled kids are learning this stuff. We can't even assume that defunded public schools are always learning this stuff, although public schools in many respects are still doing great jobs for so many students. But we've got to rebuild those arguments. I want to go to your calls. Let's go to Bob from San Jose. I think that's how you pronounce it. Maybe it's San Jose. Go ahead, Bob.
San Jose.
Oh, okay,
San Jose.
okay, that's right.
Basically, I should tell you, I'm a broadcast engineer. And
Yeah.
in a studio like where you are, there were people who wired the place.
Yep.
And put in new equipment, and if something hiccups, they know how to reset it or bypass it or whatever. The point is, when that new equipment came in, the first thing they did was probably run it for a while, but not trust it.
Yeah.
Because you get what's called infant mortality on the brand new hardware.
Yep.
After a couple of months, it's trustworthy. You've gone past the infant mortality thing, and now you're into a period of very few failures. If you plot this thing, it's called the bathtub curve. It's literally like the cross section of an old-fashioned clawfoot cast iron bathtub,
with a little bit of lip on one side, and then a pretty steep,
a very steep decline, and then a level, almost horizontal at the bottom, and then a gradual, as you get further and further away from new, the failure rate starts climbing again, and it's on an angle.
And then it gets pretty steep, and then the failure rate, if it's shaped like a bathtub, starts getting pretty steep.
It starts very steep, falls quickly, stays low for a long time, then gradually starts increasing. And that gradual increase is old age failures.
Got it. All right.
And so what I think when the lady who called in talked about sequestration, she was talking about after the initial infant mortality period is gone and you're in the period of low failures, you can cut the repair budgets and get rid of the people who installed all that stuff because the stuff just keeps working. But when you get further out, you get into old age, and now things are wearing out. This is literally called old age failure. And many manufacturers build things with parts that have relatively known lifetimes. So they design for 10 years or 15 years. But when you get to that 10-year or 15-year point, now you start seeing the old age failures. And I think that was what was happening in the Newark airport. What I read just a few minutes ago was that they had several outages in the past year, not just one, and they were shorter, but they happened. Now, if you have gotten rid of the $50 an hour or $70 an hour technicians who installed all that stuff and know how it's all connected, and replace them with brand new people who are beginners who don't know how all the pieces are interconnected, don't know how to troubleshoot this stuff because everything just kept working. So they've cut the budget. Now they're into old age failure in the hardware and newbies who don't know where everything is. And that's why you got that 90-second outage, and that's why those air traffic controllers went on strike. They are aware of the consequences of much of the hardware, the radio hardware, the radar hardware, the other hardware that's in between them and those airplanes is failing from old age. And it's going to be happening, I think, across the whole country, not just Newark.
Bob, thank you so much for the call.
Republican.
Well, go ahead. Finish your thought. Go ahead.
Well, no, I say I'm an old broadcaster. I've been working in radio and television since 1964.
Yeah.
I know this stuff.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you for getting into this subject. This is a big one, and we're going to be living with the consequences it's going to take a while to recover from that sequestration thing.
Yep. Bob, thank you so much for the call.
Anyway, thank you.
No, appreciate it, man. Appreciate it. And we got the smartest group of listeners in radio. We appreciate our callers. The call-in line is 202-808-9925. A couple thoughts come to mind from Bob. Mostly just retweeting it, double-clicking on it. But some others. I am thinking about my water heater. So I have a water heater. And last year, the water heater guy, it's supposed to be an Insta-Hot, right? So you turn the water on. It's supposed to the energy efficient one. It's not one of the big old tank heaters, right? It's kind of a little one that fits on a wall. And it's supposed to keep some hot water in there, so it's warm as soon as you turn the shower on, as soon as you start doing the dishes, right? And it stopped being warm right away. It needed to, I needed to warm it up, which meant I had to turn on the water and have the water go a little while, or just start with it cold. And everybody who's lived a life has had to make this decision, right? Do you how long do you just let water run down the drain, or how much do you just say, I can jump in when it's a little cold. I can start doing my dishes when it's a little cold. And I had the guy come out and do an estimate on how much it would cost. And he said, well, it's going to be $300 to $500 because what you have is like, I don't remember if it was a pump or a motor. I thought it was a motor. This time he said it was a pump. Either way. And he says, it's obviously still heating water, but it no longer is doing the thing that makes it instant. And he said, but it's, older water heater, and you might consider replacing it. But that's, a couple few grand, whatever. And I was like, well, maybe I should, and so I sat on the decision about whether to keep that water heater and fix it for a few $100 or replace it. Well, finally, it was getting, it seemed like it was getting worse. One night, it took kind of long while. I wasn't in the mood to jump into the cold water, and felt I was wasting some water, and that didn't seem good. It was just one more area where I'm kind of a hypocrite. And so we called the guy back, and he looked at it. He said, well, the repair would have been, $300 or $400, but now we got another thing unrelated to that, and that's that the board isn't working anymore. And so now repair is going to be like $1,100. I said, well, it's because we didn't do the thing before. And he said, actually, no, it's because the thing is getting towards the end of its useful life. It's that it's not a one haché. There'll be not everything will break at once, but it's about Oliver Wendell Holmes' poem, One Haché. We can explain it if he wants me to. And he said, well, it's just kind of the end of its useful life. That I thought about right now as I've been thinking about the FAA and as I've been thinking about infrastructure around the country. One of the reasons I am grateful for the Biden presidency and the Infrastructure Act is that thanks to anti-democracy, anti-American efforts to tear down public structures, we have been to too great a degree since about 1980 under-investing in maintenance, and therefore we have a bunch of deferred maintenance due on our public structures. And we know that the right wing can't be trusted to make that investment. We also know that they love to profit off of the public structures that were made. And I think about it every time I call an Uber or a Lyft. When you have all these Silicon Valley companies making all of this money based significantly on systems that were built by somebody else, on roads that were built by somebody else, that extracting from public structures rather than building them has been too big a strategy. Let's take a time for another call, and let's go to Michael from Houston. Michael, you're on the air.
Thanks for taking my call. I want to follow in the footstep in the advice of John Lewis and cause good trouble. But I want to do it within my Democratic Party. I think we need to have a revolution there, first of all. I don't think I hear everybody say the Democrats got a messaging problem. But first of all, they don't have a messaging problem. They have a leadership problem. Now, I'm going to say this here. The brilliance of Donald Trump was he tapped into the anger and the fear of his base. Democrats know that they're on the right side of all of these policies. So if you are, aren't you smart enough to say, I know we're on the right side of these policies. We gave up $3 insulin for whatever it is, and people voted against it. So what is it that's causing this guy to win? Well, Democrats, if you don't, nothing motivates people more than fear and hate. If you don't tap into your base fear and hate, we won't win. A lot of people say, well, we don't want to be ugly like this. Well, 20 years from now, we lose our democracy. We can say, well, we fought fair.
I hear you, Michael. Here's what I would say. I know we're about to go to commercial. Thank you so much for the call. I could spend 4 shows on my analysis and recommendations of how I think we need to rebuild a pro-democracy majority and consensus in this country, and the role the Democratic Party needs to play and should be playing in that. But if I were going to say the biggest challenge, I don't think the biggest challenge is that, quote, Democrats are doing the wrong thing. I think the biggest challenge is not enough people are doing enough of the right things. That mostly what we have not all, is not just a problem of direction. It is a problem of capacity. It is a problem of communications capacity, of network capacity, of fundraising capacity, and I don't just mean getting text messages asking me for $25. I mean the kind of communications and networking apparatus that helps us build a movement that lasts more than one election. We'll talk about that more, too.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We got a new pope. We'll also talk about tearing down America. Anything you're grateful for? Big show today. Here we go. Steve, you win the Most Patient Listener Award from Vermont. You got a plug.
Thanks, Jefferson. I'm a postal worker. Saturday is the National Food Drive. Please leave canned goods, powdered goods in a bag at your mailbox. All the food stays within your community. It doesn't go to a national bank and then get handed out there. It stays within your community. And now with all the prices going up, those of us that can, give a little, give a lot, step up. Let's please do this for those that are losing everything because of the orange menace.
So you're saying, this Saturday, if I just take blank number of cans or boxes of non-perishable food goods and put it somewhere near my mailbox, that a postal carrier will pick it up and get it to a local community food bank situation?
Absolutely. Jefferson, please mark the bag, because now with home delivery on stuff, I don't want to be picking up someone's groceries. But yes.
All right, exactly. He's like, where'd my muffins go? The postal worker stole my muffins. No, canned goods in a bag marked. Steve, thank you so much for that shout out. Saturday, food drive. Thank you, postal workers, not just for that, but thank you every day. It's one of the best things that was called out in the Constitution. Anybody who wants to tear down the postal organization in this country is not only anti-American, they're anti-Constitution. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Jefferson.
Bob, Cardiff, California, you're on the air.
Yeah, Jeff. Yeah, just the first thing you said this morning was something about the planes rolling off the carrier decks.
Yep.
In 1968, I spent like 9 months on a carrier off Vietnam, and we'd lose a plane now and then that came in too low in bad weather and hit the round down the back of the boat, or one thing or another. But one time, we had a 100+ knot typhoon that we were going to be coming into, and we got all the planes down on the hangar deck that we could, and chained down all the rest of the planes on the flight deck.
Mm-hmm.
And in the morning, the flight deck was clean. It broke all the chains.
Mm-hmm.
And when you said that these planes rolled off the carrier, nothing like that even came close to happen, and I haven't heard anybody explain what happened that would let them roll off of a carrier deck.
I haven't either, and I've been hopeful that a smart listener might help explain to me. When I did a little bit of research, the best guess I came across, and I don't even understand all the rhetorical architecture, I don't understand all the vocabulary, but that it could be a failure of the arrestment system. And that's essentially the cable. I think that's the cable system that holds them in place. That's the best I've come up with, but you might have even better than that.
Oh, yeah, no, they say the arresting cable, occasionally we had a couple of those break.
Yeah.
And we'd lose those planes, but that isn't a plane rolling off.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just a disaster happening.
Yeah.
And those happen now and then, especially, probably not just even wartime. Anytime planes are landing on a carrier deck.
Well, Bob, thank you for your service.
Rolling off, I kept hearing that, and I've heard it 4 or 5 times at least on different news, and I can't understand that.
Yeah. Well, I don't have all the answers either, but do appreciate your service, do appreciate your call, and that was the thin research I did. We'll see if we can dig in more, and certainly would take expertise from a listener.
Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. So what do we call the really, really mind-bogglingly rich? You know, at the founding of the Republic, they were referred to as speculators or moneyed interest or aristocrats. In the years leading up to the Civil War, we called them the cotton lords and the plantation aristocracy. In the late 19th century, they were the robber barons. In the 1930s, FDR called them the economic royalists. But since the Reagan Revolution, we've just called them billionaires. And now, you know, some of them want to call themselves tech bros. Like, that's kind of a good thing, you know, like tech is positive and bros, you know, like Mark Zuckerberg saying we need more masculine energy in American business culture. So we need a new phrase. I would like to suggest the morbidly rich. Morbidly suggests unhealthy. And the vast riches that some of these people have is unhealthy to our democracy, particularly since 5 Republicans on the Supreme Court said that morbidly rich people can buy politicians. And it's unhealthy for them, too. So morbidly rich. There's an op-ed over at HartmannReport.com all about it. Check it out.
We're at the top of the hour. Let's do a speed round to clear this board if we possibly can. Let's go to Roger. You're on speed round from Seattle, Washington.
Yes, I'm also a supporter of KBCS here in the Seattle area.
Thanks for doing it.
I wanted to thank you, Jefferson, for helping give Tom a little day of rest, even though it isn't Sunday or Saturday. So anyway, wanted to suggest that not only you could look at maybe money is the root of all evil, but Tom and I have talked about a book that we both have read called People of the Lie by M. Scott Peck. Have you read that?
I have not.
Okay, so that, I think, goes more critically to what maybe human evil might be. But anyway, I think we have examples of Carnegie, Rockefellers, MacArthur Foundation, MacArthur's, and Nobel of the Nobel Prize trying to make up for some of the money-type evils that their companies have had fomented, foisted on the rest of humanity. So I think if you go back to lie, that explains a lot of Trump and Musk's behavior and all of the Republicans that support them.
Appreciate the call, and I want to go to Michael, who has 40 seconds before we go to break. You win the Most Patient Listener Award. Michael, you're on the air.
Yes, hello, Jefferson. Listen, this is my lucky day. I was on with Al Green on the Washington Journal this morning also, and what I want to talk to you about is you mentioned a race to, when do we know what to do, and when is enough? Every single day there's something new, airplanes and not having communication. And once we decide that, enough is enough, what do you do? And what I would like to suggest is if you're not near a march, or if you're old, or if you're just, used to grabbing your keys instead of your shoes, I think if you're driving along any day of the week, Rachel Maddow mentioned this, that she sees, people doing little protests
10 seconds
every day. Oh, sure. And so if you're driving along and you see a long line at a McDonald's, a Walmart, or a Tesla, pull in and just hang out for as long as you want and protest and hit them where it hurts. It's about the pocketbook.
Thank you for the call, Michael. We'll be right back. News with my dad coming up next.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the HartmannReport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at ThomHartmann.com. So check them all out at ThomHartmann.com and HartmannReport.com.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Common Sense for the 21st Century by Roger Hallam. The subtitle, Only Nonviolent Rebellion Can Now Stop Climate Breakdown and Social Collapse. This is from the foreword. I was there for the past 20 years. Climate activism. It didn't work. We protested in our hundreds of millions. It didn't work. We raised billions to reach people and politicians. It didn't work. We signed countless online petitions. They didn't work. We looked to the United Nations to resolve the crisis. It didn't work. We trusted progressive politicians and their reforms. That didn't work. Al Gore had a big concert and a PR campaign. It didn't work. Countless NGOs, non-governmental organizations, did their best, and it didn't work. I worked with green NGO campaigns, champagne environmentalists, and lying politicians. I was wasting my time. I had a clue back in 2007 that there might be a fundamental flaw with the reformist approach. The problem with the political influence of the industrial billionaires like the Koch brothers and other fossil fuel bosses. It was another warm night in Los Angeles. I was invited to an exclusive event. A Tesla Roadster prototype was going to be shown to press and guests. We took turns riding around the block. I watched in amazement as the Tesla was at the end of the street in the blink of an eye, with barely a sound. I felt like a caveman seeing a television. Incredible. While I was working on a campaign in 2007, I had an idea for how to save the world with a massive music event and a huge fundraising effort led by celebrities to fund the biggest PR campaign to save the environment. It would be a huge global event, just like Live Aid. I sought out a prominent journalist at the Tesla event to tell about my scheme and bask in the glory of his praise. The journalist was Vijay Vithsaswaram from The Economist, now a life member of this Council on Foreign Relations. After listening carefully to my concept, he smiled and laughed. I was stunned. Laughter? How could I be so wrong? Vijay wasn't being cruel or unkind. He thought I was naive. He said, the fossil fuel industry has enough money to outspend any public relations campaign you might try by 100 times. He carried on talking, but I had stopped listening. I had my answer. He was right. Crestfallen, I sheepishly nodded and walked away. Over the next 12 years, I watched as fossil fuel companies used their vast financial capital to buy political parties, trick NGOs into fruitless schemes like the U.S. Cap and Trade Initiative, sow doubt about climate science in the public discourse, and slow policy reform to a snail's pace. Their strategy worked. As climate skepticism continued to spread, climate change mitigation dropped down voters' priorities. With Trump and Putin in power, it was over. I quit climate campaigning. Then I heard about Extinction Rebellion closing 5 bridges in London. Then they closed central London in April 2019. This was something different. I met Roger Hallam and he explained his ideas for a radical plan to create real change. This included First, tell the truth. Climate skepticism was pushed by the mainstream media, which spread doubt on climate science like a plague, leaving inaction in its wake. The scale of the crisis is being played down, and we must get the truth out. Second, nonviolent civil disobedience. We need to get arrested, tens of thousands of us, more. No more protests, no more petitions. Instead, nonviolent civil disobedience, lots of it, and on a large scale. Close down cities until the politicians take action, or until the people do. Third, universalism. In other words, the ecological and climate crisis should not be owned by any political ideology, culture, age, or gender. As Roger Hallam says, we all have a stake in the future. We should all be allowed to engage in action. I was convinced. We need a new approach to save ourselves and the planet. We need to spark a worldwide rebellion. We need some common sense for the 21st century. That foreword was written by, quote, anonymous climate activist. So this now is the introduction to the book. It is time to grow up and see the world as it is. There are some things which are undeniably real. There are some things we cannot change, and one of those is the law of physics. Ice melts when the temperature increases. Crops die in a drought. Trees burn in forest fires. Because these things are real, we can also be certain about what the future holds. We are now heading into a period of extreme ecological collapse. Whether or not this leads to the extinction of the human species largely depends on whether revolutionary changes happen within our societies within the next decade. This is not a matter of ideology and physics. The United Nations has estimated that we need to reduce carbon emissions by half within a decade to have a 50% chance of avoiding a global catastrophe. Of course, this is likely to be an underestimate, as recent science shows permafrost melting 90 years earlier than forecasted and Himalayan glaciers melting twice as fast as expected. The book, Common Sense for the 21st Century, by Roger Hallam, the co-founder of the Extinction Rebellion. The subtitle, Only Nonviolent Rebellion Can Now Stop Climate Breakdown and Social Collapse.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And we're back on the Thom Hartmann Show. And now it is time for News with My Dad, a show we talk about the news with my dad. And on the air now is, in fact, my dad, Joe Smith. Let's bring him up live. Dad, you there?
Live is no small thing.
How are you feeling?
Well, I've had some kind of a bug. I'm a little better today.
Hopefully it's not contagious over the airwaves. And I know it's your 90th birthday in a week and a half. Consider this your happy birthday message and your party. Happy birthday, Dad. That's all you get. That's not true.
And I have a shout out for that.
Well, let's do that after Phil Ittner. We have Philip Ittner, veteran war correspondent in Kyiv, Ukraine, and the host of the On the Edge podcast. I want to go straight to him because he's coming in from very, very far away. And then it would be delighted to have you as part of that conversation. But I want to jump into him if that's cool with you, Pop.
And what is it, 8 o'clock where he is?
We will ask him. Yep. Phil, are you on the air? 8 o'clock, what, p.m.?
8 p.m., yeah.
Well, thanks for joining us. This is the first time you and I have had a chance to talk. I know that the audience is familiar with you. You've talked to Tom on a frequent basis, and thank you for doing that. Where do you want to start? There's places I want to start because my curiosity is legion on the subject, but it is also less informed than yours. So where, Phil, do you want to start?
Well, I'll let you ask any question you want, but I will take the reins for a quick moment because we are marking the 80th anniversary of the end of the Second World War. and it's commemorated and recognized here in Ukraine with a recent change. Actually, they mark it on May 8th, whereas in Soviet times, and the Russians still mark the day on the 9th. And so we have this enormous event kind of looming over everything. There's supposed to be a 3-day ceasefire that was proposed by Vladimir Putin. That went into effect last night at midnight, but already the Ukrainians are saying the Russians are violating it on the battlefield. And cynically, the belief here is that really Putin doesn't care about stopping the fighting on the battlefield. He just wants to make sure that the Victory Day celebrations and the parade that happens annually in Moscow and around Russia, but primarily on Red Square in Moscow in front of the Kremlin, that doesn't come under attack by the Ukrainians, because the Ukrainians have the capacity to do it. And there's a grave concern in the Kremlin, apparently, that the Ukrainians might take the opportunity because, and again, I'll finish up here, and you can ask whatever question you'd like to ask. But you have to understand the difference between this is another example of how Ukrainians and Russians are not the same people. In Ukraine, this is a very solemn event. This is because of the sheer devastation that happened. And a lot of people don't recognize that actually a lot of what happened on the Eastern Front happened in this part of the Soviet Union, Ukraine and Belarus primarily. And there were battles inside Russia itself, but in the USSR, this ground was soaked with blood because of the clash between the Soviet Union and Hitler's Germany. And so here it's very solemn, it's very thoughtful. There are no parades, there are no celebrations. Children are not dressed up in vintage clothes to look like Soviet soldiers. Mm-hmm. I lived in Moscow. I've seen several. I was there for several Victory Day celebrations, because that's what they are. They celebrate it as a victory over Nazism, and rightfully so. The Soviet Union clearly was, a huge part of the victory against Nazi Germany. And so they have every right to celebrate, but the mentality is decidedly different. It is joyous. It is very kind of proud of their imperial might. That's why they have the tanks roll past on Red Square. You will not see that in Kiev. You will not see that in Odessa or Lviv here in Ukraine. But the Russians see this as a celebratory event. And given the tragedy of what happened here on Ukrainian soil, it's perceived very differently. So that's the historical dialectic of kind of
so as
the event here.
So push back on this analogy or add more to it. As I listened to you talk, it reminded me of maybe the United States, the difference between Pearl Harbor commemorations and 4th of July. That we don't, to commemorate Pearl Harbor, we don't have big parades and happily fly flags and eat barbecue with smiles, right? We try to honor the loss and the tragedy that occurred, and on 4th of July, not related to
the day that will live in infamy.
But on the 4th of July, we celebrate. Is that a decent enough analogy, or how would you improve it?
I wouldn't say it's a one-to-one analogy, because not everything is the same. But the similarities in the atmosphere of a July 4th as opposed to marking Pearl Harbor, I would say that's similar to how things are. In Ukraine, it's much more somber. In Russia, it's celebratory. And also it renews sense of empire and military and martial might for the Russians. So there's that going on as well. And if the Ukrainians, I will tell you this, for Russians, the Second World War is not history. It is, it's religion. Mm-hmm. It is a deeply it's a deeply profound thing for them. Celebratory, yes, obviously also considering the deaths of the Second World War, but for Russians, in many ways, the history of that time period is elevated to a mythology, to a religion. Every family has a story about whether it's apocryphal or not. I've heard some doozies. Everybody has some, that our family was involved in this. The Ukrainian perspective is we lost people. I lost my uncle. I lost my, my great grandfather, whatever it is. It's just it's another example of how these two countries are not the same. But I will tell you, if the Ukrainians do, and the Ukrainians are going to do what the Ukrainians are going to do. We don't have, they're going to pursue their interests. If there's concern that they might attack that parade, and I will tell you, whether or not they do it or not, that's their call. But if it happens, the Russians will go absolutely mental, and there will be massive attacks.
I'll ask a question. Maybe Pop has a question he wants to ask after that. Let me ask this.
Yeah.
Is the
question, floor is yours. That's the only point I wanted to make. So from here on in,
let me ask a question or two. So one is, and maybe it's a compound question, so that'll give you freedom to choose what you want to answer. A baseline question I have, and I think probably you have too, is there an end game when it comes to Vladimir Putin? Is there a desired path out of this other than continued acquisition and continued encroachment? Is there a path to peace from the Russian perspective? And on the ground, is that speculated upon, hoped for, desired, believed in by the Ukrainian people? Second part of the question, maybe it's a totally different question, is the fear or speculation that there would be a false flag operation, something that where Putin would try to be James Harden, for a sports analogy, and draw a foul, right, and flop, or create a situation that would justify escalated military operations in Ukraine. Take either of those or both you want.
Well, let's take the first question first. And, what can be achieved? Is there a peace? I don't see a peace anytime on the horizon, sadly. It's possible, but the two sides, even in J.D. Vance's recent statements, accepting the fact that the two sides are just too far apart. And that's for a variety of different reasons. There's a lot of mistrust. There's a lot of anger. And it's for the Ukrainian side, they are concerned about a resumption of attacks. That if the war were to stop tomorrow, that all that the Russians would do is, rearm, resupply, get more soldiers, and then come back and, I don't know, a year, 5 years, 10 years, whatever. You have to understand this is an imperial war. This is a war of colonization. Yeah. Ukraine is not Russia, as I was explaining earlier. And so Moscow has imperial designs on Ukraine. And so that's what the Ukrainians are afraid of, because they have centuries of experience with Moscow. Every time Moscow gets knocked down, whether it's the fall of the Tsarist Russian Empire and the subsequent Civil War, when kind of Russia contracted, eventually they get back up on their feet and then they expand back again, and Ukraine is first on their target list because it's the cornerstone of their empire.
Are you more worried about Ukraine might decide to attack Victory Day? Are you more concerned about Russia faking something, or are you less concerned about either thing?
Well, I am concerned about it. I'm concerned that the Ukrainians would do it, but I am not one to tell you. I am a guest in this country, and also I believe in the sovereignty of Ukraine. If that's the decision that they make, I don't think it's the right thing to do, but that's not my call to make. And if they do decide, there's plenty of justifiable reasons why. We're still digging babies out of rubble. Sorry to be so graphic. So, I mean, you can see why Ukrainians might put caution to the wind and say, I don't care, it's a target, we're going to hit it because we've been so aggrieved and there's so much pain here, and justifiably. A false flag event. I mean, I lived in Moscow in 1999 when the apartment buildings brought Vladimir Putin into the presidency and replaced Boris Yeltsin. there is not a single doubt in my mind, but that those apartment buildings were a false flag event, and that's what brought Putin into power and allowed him to start a second Chechen war, which he then subdued that breakaway republic within the Russian Federation.
That's helpful.
A false flag is entirely possible.
Appreciate it. Stay with us over the break. Phil Ittner, war correspondent in Kiev, your pronunciation choice, and the host of On the Edge podcast. I want to hear also from Pop during the break. And then we're back. This is my dad. This is Tom Show. This is your show. I'm Jeff. Thank you.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Lots of news today. Thank you so much, Phil Ittner. We'll also be talking Pope and other stuff right after the break. This is my dad. Thom Show. And we are back. Phil, want to stick with you for a moment and Dad give you a chance. Was there any insight, Dad, you wanted to offer? Any question you wanted to ask this witness?
I have a question. As you probably know, in the last hour, white smoke has come up in Rome. So there is a new pope. My understanding is that in Ukraine, the church descends from Constantinople rather than from Rome. But I'm wondering, how significant do you see religion playing a part in the resolve and the attitude and the backbone of the relative populations in Russia and in Ukraine?
It's a great question, and I actually interviewed a representative of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church here in Ukraine, and we fleshed that out. So if, we talk about that on the podcast, and if you want to go back and check my channel, there's a great conversation, lasts about an hour. This is a mixed religion country. We have Orthodox here, you're right, which descends from Constantinople. There's a kind of an odd, and then there are lots of Catholics, like out in the West. And then there's a kind of an odd religion that's kind of a mix of the two, which has Orthodox rites, but it takes its power from the Vatican. There's a whole bunch of mix mash of religion here in Ukraine, and it is very important. These are a deeply religious people, the Ukrainians, and they do take into account their faith when they're fighting, for their country. On the flip side of things, I'm far more cynical, I'm afraid. The head of the Russian Orthodox Church is a former KGB officer, and religion is often used as kind of a bludgeon, or as Marx would say, the opiate of the masses. I mean that the church and Putin are in a relationship where the one benefits the other. I would say the Kremlin is the stronger of the two partners, but Patriarch Kirill, who is this former KGB guy, the head of the Russian Orthodox Church, will do things like bless fighter planes, and he will, he'll make, that it's a holy war. He claims that this is a holy war here, and that your sins will be absolved if you come to Ukraine and fight for the Russian Empire. So it's far more cynical, in my opinion, my take on it, on the Russian side of things when it comes to religion, and here in Ukraine, it's still very much a source of strength. Again, they're deeply, deeply religious here. So a lot of people, the Catholic population of Ukraine, will be looking intently towards the Vatican to see who the new pope is. There is a lot of criticism about the last pope because the Ukrainians saw him as being too complacent to the crimes that Russia has been committing here. So again, a lot of people here in Ukraine are going to be waiting to see what that white smoke means.
Well, Phil, perfect timing. Thank you so much for being a friend of the show. Thanks so much for spending this time. Thanks so much for the work you're doing each and every day. Shout out again for Phil Ittner in Ukraine and the On the Edge podcast. Thank you so much, Phil.
Anytime. Thank you.
We'll be right back. This is my dad, Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jeff.
Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. You know, other countries enjoy benefits like free health care in college, modern mass transit, affordable housing, food, and drugs. They also have inexpensive internet and phone service without companies listening and selling their information. Schools that don't need to mention school shooters. Streets and parks filled with pedestrians and children instead of tents and homeless people. We, on the other hand, have the world's largest collection of billionaires. Most Americans probably didn't realize this was the choice they were making back in the election of 1980 when Reagan and Bush promised morning in America. But here we are. We have been just basically sold out to the billionaires by all these years of Republican, Reaganomics. What do we do about it? Well, there's a lot we can do about it, and it starts with getting politically active. There's a great op-ed about this over at HartmannReport.com. It's titled, America Chose Wealth Over Well-Being. Check it out.
I sometimes wonder. Dad, so we now know it is Cardinal Prevost, the American Pope, first American Pope. There's sort of been a taboo on having an American Pope because the United States is already so powerful. What do you make of it so far? All I can tell so far is that he is viewed largely as a centrist, a moderate, maybe even a compromise pick. Any initial take on Cardinal Prevost?
I do not profess to have sufficient expertise to give an intelligent opinion, but I am going to watch with great interest folks who know a lot more about it than I do have to say. It is interesting that we got an American Pope because the speculation did not include any American from any source I saw.
Yeah, no, it reminds me of Abraham Lincoln getting selected president. Didn't happen on their selected nominee. Didn't happen on the first ballot, is my guess. Although, you know, you and I watched Conclave, great movie, and this wasn't the longest Pope selection ever. Before we go to the break at the bottom of the hour, you have a shout out. And sometimes there would be music, and that music was something like, shout it, shout it, shout it out now. Usually the music would be better than that, but that's what we had today. Pop, what's your shout out?
Two shout outs. First for Alan Alda, the great actor who turned 89, to turn my age yesterday, as I understand it, and who, with diffidence and humor and intelligence, sets an example for us all. And then I just want to shout out for the National Basketball Association players who who have been ignoring seeding, who have kept playing when they were way behind, producing amazingly entertaining basketball games. It's just been remarkable.
Well, we're going to go to break at the bottom of this hour. We'll come back with, Dad, want to ask you a little bit about the FAA stuff. You've got a background of having serving on the aviation board and as well as being a flyer yourself, and want to get your perspective. We'll do that. And your calls, everybody, right after this. Thank you, everybody. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It is the Thom Hartmann Program. It is Thank You Thursday. It's hard to think about what you're grateful for. Where's America getting torn down that we've got to be aware of?
It's Thom Hartmann University Book Club. In the weeks after 9/11, Rodale Press reached out to a bunch of folks, me, the Dalai Lama, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, Rabbi David Wolpe, Thich Nhat Hanh, Chuck Colson, Neil Donald Walsh,
and asked for thoughts about a spiritual response to the attack on America. The result was a book, From the Ashes. And this is from the chapter that I wrote, The Goddess of Democracy, a Sacred Archetype to Heal the World. People argue that the terrorist attacks against the United States reflect a war between one religion and another, or between the poor and rich of the world. While there may be an element of truth to each, I'd suggest that the real war here is between the 11th century and the 21st century. And while our leaders, and until our leaders figure that out, we may miss some great opportunities. Back in the Dark and Middle Ages, the Catholic Church ruled Europe. Women were often forbidden to go out in public unless properly covered, and were explicitly the property of men. Justice was swift and severe, ranging from disfigurement to torture to death in horrific ways, and most often meted out with the approval or supervision of clerics. The power behind the power of all the royal families of Europe was the Pope. On November 27, 1095, Pope Urban gave one of history's most famous speeches to the Council of Clermont in France, calling for a holy war against Islam to unite factious Europe. Dr. E.L. Skip Knox of Boise State University in Idaho summarized the Pope's speech. The noble race of Franks must come to the aid of their fellow Christians in the East. The infidel Turks are advancing into the heart of Eastern Christendom. Christians are being oppressed and attacked. Churches and holy places are being defiled. Jerusalem is groaning under the Saracen yoke. The Holy Sepulchre is in Muslim hands and has been turned into a mosque. The Franks must stop their internal wars and squabbles. Let them go instead against the infidel and fight a righteous war. God himself will lead them, for they will be doing his work. There will be absolution and remission of sins for all who die in the service of Christ. Here they are poor and miserable sinners. There they will be rich and happy. Let none hesitate. They must march next summer. God wills it. Thus began a war between two different medieval cultures, 11th century Catholic and 11th century Muslim. Over the next few centuries, the Catholics, with their battle cry of Deus Vult, God wills it, were often victorious against the Muslims, whose only crime defined by the Pope was that they were living in the Holy Land of the Catholic Church. Medieval historian Raymond of Aguilles wrote the following eyewitness account of the attack and seizure of Jerusalem in 1099 by the triumphant Christian crusaders. Quote, some of our men cut off the heads of their enemies. Others shot them with arrows so they fell from the towers. Others tortured them longer by casting them into the flames. Piles of heads, hand, and feet were to be seen in the streets of the city. It was necessary to pick one's way over the bodies of men and horses. But these were small matters compared to what happened at the Temple of Solomon, a place where religious services were ordinarily chanted. What happened there? If I tell the truth, it will exceed your powers of belief. So let it suffice to say, this much at least, that in the temple and portico of Solomon, men rode in blood up to their knees and bridle reins. End of quote. In the 900 or so years since the early Crusades, both Christianity and Islam have undergone profound changes. The Protestant Reformation shook Christianity to its core, and the Renaissance in Europe wrought huge transformations in both Christianity and Judaism. Perhaps the most critical change came about in the 18th century when Jefferson, Madison, Franklin, and others synthesized the highest ideals of Greek, Roman, and Iroquois thought and culture to create the United States of America. In doing that, they ignited the flame of liberty, bringing into the world an archetype that to this day inspires hope worldwide. As America grew and our ideas of Republican democracy spread around the world, further transformations of the world took place. Another turning point was when modern science challenged the medieval worldview of the church in the Scopes monkey trial of 1925. Although Clarence Darrow lost that case, its widespread publicity began a dramatic and lasting process of change across the world. The American dream is a powerful and pervasive force in the world, even if the sometimes imperialistic behavior of our transnational corporations is often at odds with our own ideals. That dream has wafted over the entire world and is still so powerful that people are willing to die for it. In China, the Tiananmen Square protesters marched to their doom in 1989, carrying a 37-foot-tall papier-mâché replica of the Statue of Liberty, which they had renamed the Goddess of Democracy. Of course, there are still pockets of medieval perspective in the Christian world. The post-disaster comments of Jerry Falwell and Pat Robertson, who have said they had just witnessed the wrath of their God, who had lifted the veil and allowed the terrorists to act because of their God's anger over homosexuals, liberals, and the ACLU, reveals that such a worldview is still alive and well in a small fringe of Christianity. Some Christians are still today willing to commit terrorist acts of murder or mass murder. Timothy McVeigh and those who murdered numerous abortion providers all claimed their acts are grounded in Christianity and biblical teachings. And just as 21st century Christianity still has its own pockets of medieval worldview, so does 21st century Islam. And then it gets into, how these reformations happen and, what we hope to see in among those right-wing crazies in Islam. The book is From the Ashes, A Spiritual Response to the Attack on America.
Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. Our podcast, The Hartmann Report, is absolutely free and available wherever fine podcasts are available. And the entire 3-hour podcast is available over at thomhartmann.com. From Los Angeles to Columbia, South Carolina, from Birmingham, Alabama to Baltimore, universal basic income programs are chalking up proof after proof of their viability. Basically just giving people, low-income people, poor people, somewhere between $500 and $1,500 a month, no strings attached, is lifting people out of poverty, getting them back on track, getting them into solid middle-class jobs, helping their children tremendously. This works. Now, we don't have to do UBI in the United States. We're the only developed country in the world that doesn't have a national health care program. Health expenses are whacking a lot of low-income people. We're the only developed country in the world that doesn't have free college education. Education expenses are whacking people. There's a lot we could do. We can subsidize housing. We can subsidize food. We do that with food stamps. We could expand it. There's a lot we could do to benefit from this. There's a whole report about that over at hartmannreport.com. Check it out.
We're back. All right, Pop, I've learned a little bit more about now Pope Leo. I actually take the selection of that moniker as maybe a good sign. I am looking for places and sources of potential hope. Leo was the father of social justice, also formerly Cardinal Prevost, now Pope Leo, or soon to be Pope Leo. I don't know if it's already official or if he has to have another ceremony. That he was a close confidant of Pope Francis, who's probably been my favorite pope. That's what I know about it. But Bob, where do you want to go next? I at least want to talk to you about FAA stuff. Anything you want to talk about before that?
Well, commenting on the Pope, something that is going to be really interesting to watch is what will be the relationship between the new Pope and the present president.
Sure.
With the new Pope being an American, that's going to be something to watch.
My optimism, and I temper my optimism, but as I try to think about what could be the pieces of the social, economic, political, communications sort of narrative, those dynamics that could lead to a resurgence of commitment to shared morality, a commitment to shared prosperity, a commitment to shared democracy, a commitment to an economy that works for more people rather than fewer, a commitment to being stewards of the land and not just extracting for short-term benefit. And one of the best hopes might be an American Pope who's focused not only identity issues to cover over oppression, potential oppression, but who reminds us that the Bible taught that it is easier for a rich man to fit through, a camel to fit through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to get to heaven, to remember the turning of the tables of money changers, to remember the basic ideals of the Christian church, which advocated for greater equality of human beings and greater compassion and greater taking care of the sick and feeding the poor and not just manipulating the poor and casting aside the sick. It's one of the It's one of the big moves in the chessboard that could help. I'm not making any predictions, but I'm allowed to have hope. Last word on that from you, Pop. Otherwise, next story.
Next story. Everybody get your pencil ready and paper ready, because I'm going to have a phone number for you. DDT, Trump has sued CBS News, asking for $20 billion, claiming that they violated a Texas law by, in a 60-minute interview with Kamala Harris. 9 senators, one of whom is ours, Jeff Merkley, I'm proud to say, has written the president, the person ultimately in charge of what CBS is going to do about that, urging her to not enter into any deal because it's just a phony lawsuit. And I am just really, really hoping that CBS will stand pat. And what you need to do if you care about this is to call Paramount Global, which is the ultimate owner of CBS, at 212-258-6000. That's 212-258-6000, urging them to stick to their guns and not give in to this awful man's awful lawsuit.
Appreciate that, Pop. And one of the things I like about the move of calling a company, of calling a media organization in particular, is that they care about listeners, they care about viewers, they care about ratings, they care about advertisers, even beyond political party membership. And I'll explain what I mean and why I say that. When you call a member of Congress, if you're calling a Democrat, it's not this simple, but it's almost this simple. When you're calling your Democratic, big D Democratic representative, often what you'll be doing from this program is reminding them to be a Democrat, is making sure that they don't get led down the primrose path by a lobbyist or by some other set of ideologues. And if you're calling a Republican, you're hoping that they might do the right thing if they hear from some constituents. But they're kind of counting noses about can they win their primary and can they win the general. They're thinking about that through a political party lens. If you're buying products, if you are watching something, your vote counts just the same, even if they don't have a contested primary and even if they don't have a contested general election. Because for a media organization, every day is a contested primary. Every day is a contested general election. You can vote with your eyeballs and you can threaten that you might. So I appreciate that. Dad, next story. We got time for probably one more.
Well, do you want to talk about the FAA?
Yeah, let's do it.
The problems really began when Ronald Reagan, instead of granting the controllers, air traffic controllers, need for a living wage, but more important, for adequate time off, fired them all. I want to say that as flying for more than 50 years, I have been so impressed with the folks at ATC, in the tower and in the centers, just amazing. But the thing that is most needed is, even in my mind, more than the technological advances which need to take advantage of, which have not received the proper investment, is making sure that the controllers are adequately fed and adequately rested and adequately trained, which means if you don't have enough of them available, you're having people working longer hours, not getting rest, and controlling air traffic is not the place for someone who is fighting sleep or feeling poorly. And the lack of interest that Trump has shown in dealing with this is appalling, but you can't place it all on him. It really goes back over decades to where not enough attention has been paid to seeing to it that the control cabs in the towers and in the centers are adequately trained and adequately rested and adequately compensated, so we're getting the best. And
we don't want air traffic controllers to be too tired, too hungry, too green, or too few.
Exactly.
All right, Pop, I agree with that. And I do see this through a broader lens of not just deferred maintenance, but also tearing down America and calling it patriotism. It is tied for the biggest big lie of not only this current administration, but the movement that helped build this, helped put in place this current administration. Dad, let's do a straw in the wind, and what we might have is music that would go something like a straw in the wind, but we'd want actually good music rather than that. But so because we don't have that, we'll just move along and ask for your straw in the wind.
I hope it is a straw in the wind. I hope that the withdrawal of Ed Martin as the nominee to be the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, because there are a few Republican senators who have showed apparently a little bit backbone, means that we will be getting more courage from the Republican side of the aisle in resisting the absolutely appalling quality of folks who Trump has been nominating for positions, especially in the defense, in the law enforcement establishment.
It's a good one, Pop. I hope you feel better. Thanks for calling in today. Love you a bunch.
Good to be with you. Love you too.
All right, folks. Well, that was my dad. Thanks for being with us. We'll be right back in just a moment. 202-808-9925. We'll be back with your phone calls here on Tom's Show. I'm Jeff Smith, your show. The conversation, the expertise from callers, from Dad, etc., from the news media around what's happening with the FAA, and it's useful for us to understand and make sure that we get to put focus where the focus needs to be, which is on the tearing down in America and not just on countermeasures and distractions. More about that after this break and your calls.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program. You should visit ThomHartmann.com for video news and archives. We'll be right back. Catherine, Chicago, Illinois, the sort of hometown of the new Pope. But I don't think that's why you're calling. You're on the air. You win the Most Patient Listener Award.
Hi, Jefferson. Thank you. I like your commentary when you're filling in for Tom.
Oh, thanks.
So I want to talk about Mr. Fetterman for a minute, because I don't think this is getting enough attention. He seems to be becoming very easily angered and aggravated lately, for maybe a number of reasons, but including the things that we're familiar with, the depression, the suicidal ideation, maybe some funky drugs that have horrible side effects, and then the stroke, and then whatever. This situation about him can be very complicated, but it seems pretty fragile, and I don't think people are paying attention to it very much. He's the perfect example of MAGA using him, yet making fun of him at the same time. Yet the DNC doesn't seem to be addressing the potential seriousness of this, and as long as he can vote, he can stay. There's rumors that his wife is kind of staying away from him because she's afraid. There's rumors that he recently bought firearms. This guy can be an explosion waiting to happen, and instead of pushing him out, which could really, make him, who knows what that could do to him in his current state now. But he needs to somehow get into a safer place and away from people and in a monitored environment, because the potential for what could happen to him, he's like a football player with massive CTE and, 3 concussions in a matter of 2 months. I mean, this is really potentially kind of dangerous. He shouldn't be there. He's done his time. He's done good work, but he's changed. Mm-hmm. He's not meant for that place anymore, and he needs to go.
All right. Well, I appreciate your calling in, and I understand your view, Catherine. Thanks very much. Here's what I'd say. I don't know. I've met John, but I don't know him, and I'm also not in a position to evaluate his mental health. I have conflicting concerns. One set of concerns is precisely yours. The other is, one could view it as, but also not as, the role of the DNC to pick who should be the primary opponent, or even who should be the Democratic nominee within a state. In fact, when it feels like Central Command is picking the nominee, local voters don't much like it, and if their candidate doesn't win, it can erode trust within the national party, or trust for the national party. So we got to be a little careful about that. The other note I want to make, the one thing that makes me a little nervous, is we should be thinking. So first, let's make sure we're operating on, and you provide better information than I do, but make sure we have good mental health information, that we're listening to doctors. And I would like to hear from people who are close to him, who can best evaluate. And I've seen some of the news reports. What makes it just a little bit nervous is those are also the news reports I would push if I was trying to push them out. And if I were pushing them out, I might be trying to push them out because I wanted to have a better candidate who could make sure, I'm going to call him a Democratic candidate, capital D Democratic candidate, who could advocate well for their state and win in a general election. It's also the kind of thing I might want to do if I wanted a Republican to take the state. And it's a little bit why I was wanting to have a rational view when we were looking at the presidential primary. But Catherine, I appreciate the call. We're going to break. If you have one word, you have a time for a word.
That's it.
All right. Thank you very much. That's it. And we'll be back with more of it. No, thank you. We'll be right back.
Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us.
Dirk from Bellingham, Washington, you're on the air.
Hi. I wanted to say I was kind of thinking about Mount Rushmore, how, Trump is compared to himself, to a couple of the presidents up there. And the pathway to Mount Rushmore never got finished. I was wondering if, that's on his plate next, too, to have his face emboldened as one of the greatest presidents and clear the pathway.
I like the call and I like the topic for two reasons. One, because I think the odds of that coming up by at least some supporter of his, at least some talk radio head, at least some OAN or Truth Social or some other of the right wing media, bringing that forward, I think is pretty likely. And also because it's a good trigger for a thing I do want to talk about. I don't know if people noticed the taking down of the Martin Luther King bust out of the White House. It made my wife sick to her stomach. Of course, people are aware of the Gulf of America stuff. Of course, people are aware of photo shoots with prisoners. What do these things have in common? They are focused on symbolism. They are focused on trying to promote, to build the symbolism of state to advance the attention where they want the attention and the ideology that they want to advance. And I think that has two things to be aware of. It's pernicious for two reasons. One, because symbolism matters. It matters. When national airport is called Reagan Airport, it tells everybody that there has been a national decision that that is something that should be lauded forever. Same thing with Kennedy Airport. One of the reasons Republicans fought so hard to go after Clinton towards the end of his presidency is because they didn't want a bunch of stuff named Clinton. And this is historically, in recent history, we haven't had a president more popular than Clinton since then. He was very popular during his presidency. They didn't want a bunch of stuff named Clinton because they recognize that they are in a battle for symbolism, and they are in a battle for communication. They're in a battle for hearts and minds. They are in a truth war every day. But the other thing that I think happens, whether if they bring up Mount Rushmore or Martin Luther King's bust in the White House, or no, it's got to be Gulf of America, is that it's also a countermeasure. and I'll explain what I mean. And this is something that really just started occurring to me recently. People watch Top Gun, Maverick. Okay, I like these movies. Ever seen Crimson Tide with submarines? Top Gun's about airplanes. In both of those, both submarine movies and in some fighter jet movies, they have countermeasures. So the countermeasure is the thing that when a torpedo is coming after your submarine, when a missile is coming after your airplane, you shoot out these lower grade explosive charges that are hot enough or loud enough or bright enough that they can distract the torpedo, that they can attract the missile to go after that little explosion, go after that heat, go after that light, go after that noise, go after that explosion, instead of the airplane, instead of the submarine that launched those countermeasures. When Donald Trump gets us focused on Gulf of America, he's throwing countermeasures out there. He's throwing out the explosions. Not that they don't matter, but he is hoping that we train our attention on those things rather than on him tearing down America, rather than on his corruption, rather than on his getting millions and millions and billions of dollars in contravention not only of norms, of the principles, and in violation of the Constitution. And so I think that it is likely that this is not the last conversation about Mount Rushmore, not only because they think symbolism is important, but because they think that fights over symbolism are countermeasures, are distractions, are little other explosions that keep their plane, keep their submarine on track to attacking the best parts of America there are. That's my take to your question. Last word for you.
Well, I think you're right. I mean, look at Russia giving the president a portrait. And, you know, all the things with Putin, how he's so tied to the Orthodox Church, and a former KGB head runs the church. So symbolism is a lot. That is for sure. And, you know, the king of crypto now, he's got a lot of memes, and he's got his own coin coming. And everybody's going to go cha-ching every time it changes hands. Yep. Take care. Thank you very much for your show.
Thank you so much, Dirk. Appreciate it. Michael from Barrington, Illinois. You are on the air.
Hi, Jefferson. Thanks for your good words, your analysis. Can you hear me okay?
I can. We're almost at break, so give your shout out, and if we need to go longer, we will.
Sure. I'm shouting out for May Day. We're 1 week away from a really important day where 700 and something cities around the United States just demonstrated, you know, and I was trying to go to the Chicago demonstration, but I ended up in Forest Park, just west of Chicago. Forest Park has the Haymarket Martyrs of 1886 gravestones. Around the major big Haymarket Martyr gravestone is all these other gravestones, 100 and something from around the world, of socialists, anarchists, leftists, unionists. It's amazing how they've displayed this year. They had wonderful signs around each important grave. I would suggest people go to Forest Park, Illinois. There were people from all over the world there last week, a week ago. So I just wanted to let you know about that. This is a spinoff from yesterday's last call, I think, with Tom. And I thought they were talking about May Day. So I thought I'd add this to you.
Michael, thank you so much for the call. Appreciate it. You're listening to Tom's show. We're going to go to break. Right after break, we're going to take your calls. We've got a couple lines open. The call-in number 202-808-9925. 202-808-9925. Anything worth being grateful for? Anybody finding solace or hope or little bits of strategy where he might be able to turn the tide? Or where are the areas where America is being torn down that we need to make sure we are focusing on? Not only on countermeasures, not only on little explosions, but on the big stuff that we got to make sure we're attending to and focusing attention on. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free, and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Cokeland, The Secret History of Coke Industries and Corporate Power in America by Christopher Leonard. This is from the preface. On May 18th, 1981, 4 Wall Street bankers traveled to Wichita, Kansas. They went there to make an offer to Charles Koch, the CEO of an obscure mid-size energy company. The bankers from Morgan Stanley wanted to convince Koch to take his family's company public, offering shares for sale on the New York Stock Exchange. Their deal was squarely in line with the conventional wisdom of corporate America at the time. Going public was seen as a natural progression for companies like Koch Industries, offering them access to big pools of money and promising enormous paydays for the existing team of executives. All it required from the CEO was to surrender control. Morgan Stanley, in return, would collect a small fortune in fees. Charles Koch was 45 years old. He had run Koch Industries since he was 32 when his father died suddenly. He was trim, tall, and had an athlete's build. He spoke quietly in meetings and seemed almost passive. The bankers laid out their plan to take Koch public. They revealed what, to most executives at least, might have been the most significant detail. If Charles Koch agreed to the deal, he could earn $20 million overnight. The bankers seemed incredulous when they prepared a confidential memo about Koch's reaction. He does not want this cash, the memo reported. Charles Koch calmly explained to them why their offer made no sense. His company was breathtakingly profitable. It operated in vital, deeply complex corners of the American energy industry. During the 1980s, Koch Industries was the largest purchaser and transporter of U.S. crude oil. It owned an oil refinery. It employed teams of commodity traders who bought and sold a wildly diverse menu of raw materials and financial products, from gasoline to paper futures contracts. This might have encouraged most CEOs to take their company public. Koch Industries, however, did not want outsiders to know how much money its traders were earning. Taking the company public would expose too many of its secrets. The memo said, certain of Koch's commodity traders are particularly worried that their high salaries, once disclosed to the public, would be used against them by their trading partners. Secrecy was a strategic necessity for Koch Industries. Charles Koch did not want to surrender it. He also didn't want to surrender control. He had a specific, clear vision of how to run his company, and he didn't need Wall Street investors to interfere. If the bankers expected Charles Koch to go along with the conventional wisdom of their time, then they, like so many outsiders, did not understand him. Beneath his low-key veneer, Charles Koch was, at his core, a fighter. He had unmovable ideas about how things should be, and he did not back down when challenged. When he was challenged by his own brothers for control of Koch Industries, he fought them in a bitter legal battle that lasted decades. When he was challenged by members of a powerful labor union during his first years as CEO, he fought them even as they committed an act of industrial sabotage that nearly destroyed Koch's oil refinery. When the FBI and the U.S. Department of Justice launched a criminal investigation into Koch Industries' oil gathering business, Charles Koch fought them with every legal and political tool at his disposal. When a liberal Congress and President Barack Obama sought to impose regulations on the fossil fuel industry to control greenhouse gas emissions, Charles Koch fought them in ways that changed U.S. politics. In each of these fights, Charles Koch prevailed. When Charles Koch dismissed the bankers in 1981, it was just a small skirmish in the larger war to control Koch Industries. After prevailing in that fight, he created a company that was true to his vision. He avoided the snares that entangled many publicly traded companies that report their financial results to investors every 3 months. Koch Industries didn't have to think quarter to quarter. The company thinks year to year. An internal think tank and deal-making committee called the Development Group will sometimes think through a business deal on a timeline measured in decades. This long-term view made Koch more nimble where other companies stumbled. In 2003, for example, Koch Industries bought a group of money-losing fertilizer plants when no publicly traded company was willing to take the risk. Today, those plants are as profitable as a broken ATM machine that spews out cash around the clock. Unlike publicly traded companies, Koch Industries does not pay out rich dividends to investors. Charles Koch insists on reinvesting at least 90% of the company's profits, fueling its constant expansion. This strategy laid the foundation for decades of continuous growth. Koch Industries expanded continuously by purchasing other companies and branching out into new industries. It specialized in the kind of businesses that are indispensable to modern civilization, but which most consumers never directly encounter. The company is embedded in the hidden infrastructure of everyday life. Millions of people use Koch's products without ever seeing Koch's name attached. Koch refines and distributes fossil fuels, from gasoline to jet fuel, on which the global economy is dependent. Koch is the world's third largest producer of nitrogen fertilizer, which is the cornerstone of our modern food system. Koch makes the synthetic materials used in baby diapers, waistbands, and carpets. It makes the chemicals used for plastic bottles and pipes. It owns Georgia Pacific, which makes the wall panels, beams, and plywood required to build homes and office buildings. It makes napkins, paper towels, stationery, newspaper, and personal hygiene products. Koch Industries owns a network of commodities trading offices in Houston, Moscow, Geneva, and elsewhere, which are the circulatory system of modern finance. The book, Kochland, by Christopher Leonard.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It was just passed to me over the break, a line that is part of the frame that I think is worth us talking about. We're related to the basic frame of our conversations today. And that's Robert Reich saying, is Starbase the future of America? Understand, Starbase was the little tiny town that they started building a launch site for Elon Musk's rocket ships, and that they convinced the not very many residents of that town to rename Starbase, and then at the promise of, we're going to invest a bunch of money into it. And if we imagine that, in some respects, like investing in a new town, creating new economic opportunity, there's advantage there. There's also risk. And I want to talk about some of that risk. That if the future of America is corporate towns, if it's Disney cities, if it is privateer public space, even those embedded connected terms might illuminate, at least tease the danger. Where are we going to get shared experience in this country? I'm for more shared experience. I think we have a stronger democracy with more shared experience. I think we are more likely to have a strong middle class with more shared experience. We know that for social mobility, I think it is the single biggest indicator, is having a rich friend. Because when you're a kid, knowing somebody from a different economic circumstance. One of the biggest drivers of social mobility. It's why we don't want economic segregation. It's why we do want economic diversity within neighborhoods. It's why we want strong public schools, including public schools that are strong enough so that parents with choices will send their kids there. It's why we want neighborhoods that aren't all behind gates. It's because shared experience is valuable. It builds trust. It can alleviate envy. It can also spur it. But we know that it reduces crime if you have more diverse neighborhoods. That economically diverse neighborhoods have lower rates of poverty and lower crime rates and lower rates of teen pregnancy. When you have a higher degree of economic diversity. I don't just mean if it could be a poor neighborhood, but as long as it has some number of working professionals in the neighborhood, some people that might be able to give you a job, somebody that might be able to recommend you something, somebody you could learn from, somebody you could imagine being when you grew up, that it significantly impacts outcomes of the people in those neighborhoods. If we carve up more and more, if we have less and less public space, if we privatize everything, how do we define America? That's really a fundamental question. How do we define America? I don't mean at its worst, I mean at its best, or even at its most central. I think that's part of the fight. One of the reasons I cleave to honest patriotism, why I make the case that America is a redemption story and we should improve it and love it, is partly because I believe that a pro-democracy America is important for the world, and I believe a pro-democracy America is only likely if pro-democracy people fight for it and lead it. And I think that if you're going to lead a country, you usually don't get to lead something unless people believe you love it to some degree. I think you're anti the thing. People say, okay, well, you're allowed to be anti the thing, but you don't get to be in charge of the thing. And I think we need pro-democracy forces to be in charge of the thing. And if we continue to privatize everything in America, what do we call America? Is it just something divided up by a few more, but fewer and fewer super duper rich nation state folks? And when I say nation state folks, it's because like when I think, I don't know if it's at $1 billion, but at some point, I don't think actually is it $1 billion, but at some point, you're not just rich. At some point, you're Bolivia. At some point, you're Luxembourg. At some point, you're your own nation state. And we should treat you with diplomats, and if you're Trump, tariffs. That it's not just, oh, you got successful. At some point, you have the power of government. And that matters, and government should care about the power that you wield and how much more you grow. And if we're helping that growth, making sure that our nation gets something from it. You've been waiting patiently. Let's go to your calls. Let's hear from Eugene from Knoxville, Tennessee. Eugene, you are on the air.
Hi, Jefferson. This is the first time I've called and the first time I really listened, but I had a friend who listens to Thom Hartmann all the time, so glad I have a chance to listen and comment. I had a couple of things. I was thinking about, the comment from your guest who was talking about how fighter planes were being blessed. And I remember when I was in college, German priests in World War I, they were talking about how German priests were praying for victory and American priests were praying for victory. So this thing about using religion as a tool to, inspire the military, that's not really a new thing. That's kind of an old thing.
Sure.
You had also talked earlier about distraction, like why, false flags and, talking about Mount Rushmore as a way for the administration to stop people paying attention to, the crimes that are being committed. Yeah. And the question I had was, why are we so distractible?
Why are we so distractible, you said?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's a good question. That's a big one. A friend of mine, and thank you, Eugene, for the call. A friend of mine just gave me a book that I haven't read yet that attempts to answer that question. Why are we so distractible? Lots of reasons. One, I think it's our nature. I think we are built with recency bias. I think we are built for out of sight, out of mind. What we can see and hear and taste in the moment is more salient to our brains and our memories than anything that was further behind or further away. I also think what's happened with the development of technology, we are getting trained to be more distractible rather than trained to be more focused. Our attention spans are being harvested. To some degree, I think I'm not just, an old man howling at the moon, yelling at my lawn. We are also getting faster processing speeds. Some of that can be good, but some of that also is losing the ability for deep work. It's getting worse, the ability to stick to a problem. Einstein, I haven't been able to get this quote exactly. I saw it printed on a wall, and I haven't been able to find it on the internet. But Einstein said something like, and if somebody's got it, you want to send it, and I would love getting the exact words, but it was a quote, something like, it's not that I was smarter than everybody else, it's that I stuck with problems longer. We have mythologized intelligence as a host of things, and too often oppressive definitions of intelligence. And some of what intelligence is just being able to stick with a problem longer. Just being able to not get distracted, not get bored. Work towards a solution. Go through the boredom, go through the pain, go through the frustration to actually figure something out. And in some respects, we're getting smarter, but in some respects, we're getting stupider because we're losing focus. And that ain't all an accident. Like if you can get somebody to look at an ad for 5 seconds, learn from that ad and want to see another one, and you could watch 6 in 30 seconds, when you can sell 6 ads instead of 1. If you can get people to watch an ad to get through a 2-minute or 90-second video, and they'll watch an ad for that, and instead of having to do blank number of commercials for a whole half hour, you could do commercials every minute. Holy mackerel, you can sell more of those. If you are rewarded by investors and advertisers for clicks, not for duration, not for solving a problem, but just for click, 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 that doesn't reward it. So I could go further, but that's some shooting from the hip. And not all just shooting for the hip. I do want to go to Adam from Dallas, who's waited patiently, former airline pilot, who can answer some questions and share some experience. Adam, go ahead. And we may go to break, but I want to stick with you. Adam from Dallas, you're on the air.
Oh, yeah, no problem. Well, first of all, I just want to say that I haven't been flying for a while, so I'm out of the loop. But your previous caller, I think, had an interesting point about christening the airplanes or blessing the airplanes. And actually, that comes from the occult. Secret societies, Illuminati or whatever you want to call these people. And what they believe is that the entire universe is one giant sea. And they refer to it as the Sea of Commerce. So they believe that even the land is sea and that commercial activity is occurring on the land and that people are vessels, like actually dual, like you have a person with a soul body, but their physical body is actually a vessel or a symbolic ship on the Sea of Commerce, which is the universe. And that's why in Christianity, when people are getting baptized, they're put into the water. They're put into the sea, symbolic sea. So they're likening the person, their physical body, as a ship, and they're setting it in the water to now sail the Sea of Commerce.
Well, I mean,
what happens is...
But the original baptisms weren't about the Sea of Commerce, and they used water.
I think they were. I mean, I think that was the hidden.
Send me a citation. I'm not in a position to confidently disagree, but I do want to understand it. But keep going or get to your point on the airplanes. Either way.
Oh yeah. So on the airplanes, it's no different. Just like they literally call it a christening of a ship, of a boat. The airplanes can have the same thing because they're considered vessels.
Yep.
Yeah, and going on the, even though they're going through the air, they're on the Sea of Commerce.
Yeah, and do you have any perspective on the current state of the FAA?
Yeah, well, I called Stephanie Miller yesterday, and I was just saying that I remember the Democrats and Biden trying to pass an infrastructure bill, and the Republicans and Fox News and everybody was like, howling about this, that trying to improve the infrastructure was a waste of money. And now here they are, like the hypocrites that they are, a little while later complaining that there's no infrastructure improvements in the FAA. So they're contradicting themselves.
Interesting. All right. Well, thank you for being a friend of the show. Thank you for calling, and thanks for perspective. We'll be right back here on the Thom Hartmann Show. I am Jeff Smith. This is your show. And the call-in number is 202-808-9925.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Ukraine Victory Day. What is the future of America? What is being torn down? What's happening in our airplanes? 202-808-9925. James from Warren, Michigan, I think. You're on the air.
Yeah, I'm in Clinton Township.
All right.
Right next to Warren. But,
all right. But you don't want to get confused. Somebody come to your house, and all of a sudden they realize we're not even in the right town.
Oh, yeah. Oh, you don't want to do that.
Exactly.
But, hey, thanks for taking my call. I got questions. Maybe you can help me out a little bit. For one thing, I'm going back to the Ukraine situation.
Yeah.
We all know what Putin wants, right?
Mm-hmm.
Ukraine, the whole of Ukraine.
Yeah, I think what the problem is that Putin wants more.
Well, for the time being, we all know that Putin wants the whole of Ukraine.
At least, but keep going.
Okay, well, we don't know, and I haven't heard anything about what Zelensky is proposing for any sort of a truce or anything like that.
I think what he would like is for Russia to stop trying to invade and taking their land, and to have systems in place to ensure they don't just re-entrench and do it again.
Right. Well, here's my point. See, I don't know if Zelensky wants Crimea back, but I don't know this. I don't know what's on Zelensky's mind as far as that goes. But my thing is, it makes perfect sense to me for Zelensky to say, you can keep Crimea and whatever you had before you attacked us and get the hell out now completely and leave us alone, and we'll sign an agreement that we won't join NATO.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you want to bargain and you want to take any more than Crimea, anything more than you want from Crimea, then you can have as much as we allow, but then we will join NATO.
Yeah. So I think you're right that both of those are bargaining chips.
Wait. I think NATO should be backing them in that direction, saying we will take them in if they work out an agreement and give you more land than you already took.
Mm-hmm. And that is an answer to the question I'm about to ask, because I think one of the critical questions for any negotiated result is how does one make sure that it's not merely appeasement? And I don't mean just the dictionary definition of that word, but you don't end up in a situation where Putin's just got time to rebuild, re-recruit, retrench, and do it again. How do you actually have a system in place to reduce it? And that. Let me finish my question, because I'm giving you credit, man. That I think that joining NATO is one answer to that question, right? That at least says, okay, well, that increases theoretically their defense capability if they're a member of NATO. Any other thoughts about if it was something short of that, if they don't join NATO, what do you put in the agreement? And it's not just in the agreement, it's not just what you sign, because why does Putin care what he signs? What do you put on the ground to make sure they don't just do it again?
Jefferson, the whole thing started, the whole thing started because Putin says that they're ready to join NATO, so we had to interfere.
But answer my question. What do you think? What would maybe you think that a signed agreement, I won't join NATO, is enough? You think that Putin just goes away forever?
I think if Ukraine gives up anything other than what Russia already holds of Ukraine land, that the agreement is, if you have...
I'm not saying what the agreement is. Do you think that agreement is enough to keep Putin away?
we'll give you the extra land you want to a certain point, but then we're joining NATO. It's very simple, I think.
Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. It's no coincidence that the time in Europe when the church ran the continent, from around the 5th century to around the 15th or 16th century, that 1,000-year period is referred to as the Dark Ages. This is what happens when religion controls politics, when religion controls the state, the nation. And every nation in Europe was controlled essentially by the Catholic Church during that period of time. It got busted up with the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century. This was what the founders of this country very much knew about. George Washington refused to declare himself a Christian. Thomas Paine wrote an entire book embracing atheism. Ben Franklin fled Massachusetts as a teenager to escape the religious threats. And Thomas Jefferson went off on it regularly. There's a whole piece about how the Republicans are trying to impose a new dark age on America. It's all laid out, all the quotes and all the links over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out.
Bit on Putin and Ukraine. We'll get to your calls. Call-in number is 202-808-9925. My challenge is that my answer to what Putin wants, and I'm citing my wise friend Tim in totally different context. And there was somebody we were working with, and he said, the problem is, I think I know what that person wants, and what they want is more. And I don't know how to satisfy more. Right? If somebody wants health care, you understand that. If somebody wants to split something, I understand that. If somebody wants more hours, fewer hours, somebody wants a hamburger, like somebody wants not to be hungry, there's various things you can imagine being able to satisfy. But if what you want is more, that's a hard want to satisfy. Because you give them some more, and then what do they want? More. You give them some of that, and then what do they want? They want more. At some point, that has to be defined, and I'm not sure how to put a limit on that at this point. Let us go to Bill from Richmond, Virginia. Who wants to talk about, well, Trump might be unpopular, but Democrats are also unpopular. Go ahead, Bill.
Excuse me. Thank you, Jefferson. Last time I called Tom's show, you were on.
Well, there you go. It's good luck for us both.
Well, listen, I tell you what I was telling your screener about, who's become one of my better friends.
All right. I don't know who that's a compliment to, but keep going.
Okay. Well, I was talking to a good friend of mine who's from North Carolina, the eastern part, which is rather red, and he's been a Republican all of his life. And we started talking about Trump, and I could have sworn that he was talking about the devil incarnate. And I'm kind of in the same boat he is. As bad as he disliked Trump in the last election, the reason he voted for him, and I know this goes on a lot both ways, was the fact that he wasn't happy with what the Democrats are doing.
Sure.
And I was looking at the Washington Post today, and Trump's popularity is the lowest it's been in the first 100 days of any president since I've been counting. But the Democratic Party has a lower rating than Donald Trump does. And I've got a couple recommendations, if I can bring them up.
Well, I'm interested. I'm not prepared to endorse them, but I'm happy to hear them. Go ahead.
No, well, first thing is this: I don't think the country is as liberal as some folks think it is. Mm-hmm. Yeah. On the East Coast, on the East-West Coast, that's fine. And to me, if the Democrats would nominate for president, and I'll go the whole thing, somebody like Bashir in Kentucky or the governor of Pennsylvania, et cetera. I mean, they don't have to be blue bloc Democrats, but if they at least would be moderate Democrats,
And I don't treat that to be an oxymoron because I have moderate Democrat friends. Because I think the thing is that I'll be quite honest, and this is not a personal thing, but if AOC and Jasmine Crockett and Bernie Sanders even are going to be the titular heads of the Democratic Party, it will remind me of the election of 1964, the election of 1972, and the election of 1984, which were a blowout for Goldwater and then a blowout for McGovern, and then the blowout for Walter Mondale. And it would seem like that the Democrats, if they're going to be, I saw Gavin Newsom wanted to do like an autopsy of the last election, and I'd be curious to see what it shows. Now, on the other side of the fence, the stuff
be silenced. Rakia was a Sahafiya, a woman journalist who secretly reported on the crimes of ISIS from inside Raqqa. But she was no ordinary reporter, at least by mainstream media standards. The 31-year-old of Kurdish descent wasn't employed by a major news outlet. She never had a byline or a dateline and was never trained to cover warfare. She hadn't conducted any interviews. And it's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Edmund Morgan's book, The Meaning of Independence, John Adams, George Washington, and Thomas Jefferson. It's a small book. It's anecdotes of the three presidents. I think he's a little harsh on Jefferson and a little too friendly about Adams, small quibbles. But it's a fascinating look into the founders of this country. And so today I'm going to read from the chapter on George Washington. The King of England, George III, was fond of farming. His favorite diversion was to ride about his lands, chatting with the tenants about the crops. Farmer George, he called himself. His arch opponent, George Washington, had the same fondness for farming. He too enjoyed riding about his lands and talking about the crops. Indeed, there was nothing else he enjoyed quite so much. But there the likeness ceased. And among the many other matters that differentiated King George Washington from George III, none was more striking than George Washington's greater reserve and dignity. George Washington would never have taken the liberty of calling himself Farmer George, nor would he have allowed anyone else to do so. Even his friends took care to keep their distance, and those who forgot to were apt to be brought up short. A familiar anecdote, though perhaps apocryphal, well illustrates Washington's customary posture toward himself and toward others. During a meeting of the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia in 1787, a group of Washington's friends were remarking on his extraordinarily reserved and remote manner, even among his most intimate acquaintances. Governor Morris, who was always full of boldness and wit, had the nerve to disagree. He could be as familiar with Washington, he said, as with any of his other friends. Alexander Hamilton called his bluff by offering to provide a supper and wine for a dozen of them if Morris would, at the next reception Washington gave, simply walk up to him, gently slap him on the shoulder and say, "My dear General, how happy I am to see you look so well." On the appointed evening, a substantial number of people were already present when Morris arrived, walked up to Washington, bowed, shook hands, and then placed his left hand on Jefferson's shoulder and said, "My dear General, I am so happy to see you look so well." The response was immediate and icy. Washington reached up and removed the hand, stepped back, and fixed his eye in silence on Morris until Morris retreated, abashed, into the crowd. The company looked on in embarrassment, and no one ever tried it again. It seems a most un-American reaction, not the sort of thing that Americans like to see in the men they honor, certainly not the sort of thing one would look for in a leader of a popular revolution today. Yet Americans then and since have honored George Washington far beyond any other man in their history. Moreover, he earned the honor and his dignity and reserve. The aloofness that still separates him from us helped him to earn it. How this came about is part of the larger story of American independence, the story of how the American Revolution transformed some of the least lovable traits of a seemingly ordinary man into national assets. For besides his aloofness, Washington had other characteristics which at this distance appear less than admirable, but which served him and the nation well in the struggle for independence. Perhaps the most conspicuous of these traits, conspicuous at least in his surviving correspondence, was an unabashed concern for his own economic interest. Although Washington was fair in his dealings and did not ask favors of any man, he kept a constant, wary, and often cold eye on making a profit, ever suspicious, and not always without reason, that other men were trying to take advantage of him. Like most Virginia planters, he complained that London merchants were giving him too little for his tobacco or charging him too much for the goods he bought from them.
When he rented to tenants, he demanded to be paid punctually and dismissed men's inability to meet their obligations as irresponsibility or knavery. If a man was so foolish as to try cheating him, he was capable of a fury that came through vividly in his letters, as when he wrote to one associate that, "All my concern is that I ever engaged myself in behalf of so ungrateful and dirty a fellow as you are." In operating his plantation at Mount Vernon, he inveighed endlessly against waste of time, waste of supplies, waste of money. "A penny saved is a penny got," he would say, or "many mickles make a muckle," by which he apparently meant that many small savings would add up to a larger one. Even in dealings with his mother, he was watchful, for he thought she had extravagant tastes. He was ready to supply her real wants, he said, but found her imaginary wants indefinite and oftentimes insatiable. Even after he left Mount Vernon in order to win a war and found a nation, his intense absorption with his estate persisted, somehow curiously out of place now and out of proportion to the historic events that he was grappling with. In the darkest hours of the war and later during some of the tensest national crises,
Help support Progressive Radio. If you're listening to us on a commercial station, call their advertisers and let them know you're listening. If you're listening to us on Pacifica, or one of our many nonprofit stations, please support them when they do their fundraising drives. Thanks for supporting Progressive Talk Radio and tag you're it. So have you noticed that the Republicans are pretty much not talking about a constitutional convention anymore? They used to be gung-ho to rewrite the Constitution. You know, they wanted to put corporate personhood in there. They wanted to change it so that women can't vote. They wanted to do away with the election of senators, repeal the 17th Amendment, take us back to them being appointed by the states. They had all these weird, they wanted to outlaw labor unions, all these weird ideas, but they've stopped talking about it. I mean, they're still moving forward on it, but it's not. Project 2025, for example, their ultimate talking document, does not have one single mention in it about a constitutional convention. Why would that be? Well, it's because the Supreme Court is doing their work for them. I mean, they have overturned Article 2. They've overturned the 1st, 4th, 9th, and 14th Amendments. They've overturned Article 1, Section 7. All the details of this whole thing are over at HartmannReport.com. You got to check it out.
Back with Bill before we got so helpfully interrupted. Bill, wasn't one to cut you off, did hear what you said, which was you think that Trump might be unpopular and is unpopular. Democrats also face popularity problems. If Democrats want to win, they ought to nominate somebody for president like the governor of Kentucky and avoid having a situation like 1964. I want to respond to that, but I want to make sure you finished your point right before I do.
Well, the point that I'm making is that if the election, and this is probably true of most elections, that Trump won because he carried the Democratic vote. I'm not worried. I mean, the independent vote, a majority of the independents, and maybe some disaffected Democrats. But the point being is, if the independents as a group are now the one that's the 800-pound gorilla when it comes to deciding elections.
Sure.
Do y'all really think, or I use collectively, that the country is that liberal? It doesn't show up in any polling I could find. I know people like Social Security and Medicare and all this kind of stuff, but that's kind of baked in already. That's not, something that's it's not like 1964 or 1933. Which had desperate times to them, at least the first one. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's what I was asking. Or do you think that the country in general is that liberal?
No, it's a great question. So So I heard you say sort of three things. I said two of them, then you said the other. And so the initial question was how do Democrats raise popularity? And there is an ongoing debate, and one side of that debate, it's not just two sides, but for simplicity's sake, one side of that debate is you said, well, Democrats need to move to the center. And then the Paul Wellstone argument is we need to move to the center of people's lives. I don't think either of those I think both of them have strong arguments. I have a third answer. The third answer is I think we need pro-democracy communications apparatus and networking. So here's the thing that we know. We know that, I think if people said, do you consider yourself an arch liberal? Pretty small fraction of Americans think that. But if you ask them, do you think climate change is real? Significant majority think do. They're not in line with the current Republican Party. If you ask them, do you think the middle class should grow or shrink? Do you think that wealth disparities are too big? Do you think antitrust law should be enforced? You already brought up Medicare and Medicaid. Do you think we should support public schools? You ask on a host of issues that if you end up lining up with the majority of America on a bunch of those things, in the challenge is under the current parlance, if you join a legislature today, you'd be viewed as one of the liberal members of that legislature because the entire apparatus of state has moved to the right over the last 40 years. And so much of the conversation, though, will focus on, I don't know, trans bathrooms or something, and make it seem like that somebody who is advocating for decent climate environmental policy, decent middle-class economic policy, like most people don't think that we should be buying elections with secret money. Most people don't think we should be gerrymandering the heck out of districts. Most people don't think we should be having insurrections. Most people aren't white supremacists. Most people aren't in line with big fundamental portions of the Republican Party and Donald Trump. But you're absolutely right. Democratic Party has a popularity challenge. I don't think that popularity challenge is resolved either by picking a more moderate candidate or a more liberal candidate. That's my own view. I think that challenge has to be solved by an infrastructure growth of making sure we have pro-democracy communications, pro-democracy networking, a rethinking of our social compact, deeper stuff, frankly, than just election by election. That's my view. Last word for you.
Okay. Like I said, I agree with you on some of what you said about what people think. But I think the thing that really has undone the Democratic Party really is this identity politics. I know people that are Democrats here in Richmond that aren't happy with some of the things that have gone on. And I'm not talking about DEI, I'm not talking about the trans thing, but I'm just saying that there are things that I don't think that the middle final thing is this. I think everybody wants the middle class to get better.
Yeah.
I mean, even
not everybody.
Oligarchs.
Unfortunately, not everybody.
Okay. Well, once again, we agree to disagree, but I love talking to you.
No, and I'll say that right now, if you look at they may say we like the middle class to get better, but if you look at the economic policies that are being pushed by Peter Thiel and Donald Trump and who are dominating way too much of the political decisions of the Republican Party, like those are not pro-middle class economic decisions, right? I mean, if you continue to primarily cut costs for wealthy Americans and take away benefits for lower income Americans and defund public schools and other pathways to the middle class, it gets sort of tricky. I mean, unless somebody really thinks that you grow a middle class by total trickle-down economics, which has never worked in any part of the country, including in this country 100 years ago. So having it's
been working, that's for sure.
Yeah.
I know when Sam Brownback tried it, and the Republicans finally had to override him because it was just killing them.
Yep.
Keep education.
Yeah.
But but again, like I said, I think it's something. If Gavin Newsom said that he wants to have I guess the word is an autopsy of the last election, I'd be awfully curious to see what that shows.
Sure,
Now-
likewise. And likewise. And I do want to get to another caller, Bill, and we've got a bunch of people in waiting. I think you might even want to jump in on this. And I offered you my view that I think it's not just not just left or right, it's forward. It's not just Democratic Party attack left or attack right. I think what we have to do is be at the center of people's lives, is figure out solving problems and build network and communications apparati in order to get more connected to people. That picking Bashir or Bernie, neither thing solves the problem. But Bill, I should go to another caller. Thank you so much.
Hey, thanks, Jefferson. I appreciate it.
Appreciate you. Let's go to Beth from Michigan. Beth, you're on the air.
Hi there. How are you?
I am well. How are you?
Oh, good, good. I was listening to your conversation, and I don't understand when people say they don't believe in the Democrats or they don't like what the Democrats are doing. And basically, you touched on all my points. It's like, okay, you don't stand up for the Constitution, okay, but you're gonna vote for Trump, who does not stand up for the Constitution. 2022, he said that he would abolish the Constitution. That gentleman's friend knew that. You know what I mean? It doesn't make sense when they say, oh, I couldn't vote for the Democrats because I just don't like what they're doing. Well, they're standing up for the rule of law. Number one, that's the main thing. Yeah, we're not purists. We're not going to like everything a party does or what a candidate says. But when it gets down to it, we want equality for all. We want the rule of law. We would like our rights upheld. Yes.
Yeah.
A transgender has the same rights that I do to buy a house. And I'll tell you, the Republicans have used a cultural war much better than we, you know, I never even thought they would get to that point. But I think you're right about the messaging. I mean, right now, Donald Trump said that he doesn't know if he has to uphold the Constitution. Why aren't the Democrats flying with that?
No, and
why
this
aren't they on every show?
And this is the thing I get to. It's like, why aren't the Democrats blank? I think so much of this is about who's going to tell them. I don't like. I have this debate with my friend Jason all the time. It's like, why aren't the Democrats telling him? And I can instantly, why aren't the Democrats saying this? And I can instantly send him like 3 high-ranking Democratic officials who are saying exactly what he wishes somebody was saying. But where are they getting covered? Who's covering that? Like right now, is there a Facebook algorithm that is fundamentally pro-democracy? Nope. Is there a Twitter algorithm that's fundamentally pro-democracy? Nope. Is there a Fox News that's fundamentally pro-democracy? Nope. Yeah, there's an MSNBC, but there is not the same degree. The media landscape is fundamentally shifted. And so we have to, and that's one of the reasons I am so grateful to this radio program and to the people who watch us on video and the people who subscribe, the people who support the stations that carry it, because we have to build the communications apparatus. One more thing on that. There's a guy who was there. I talked about the water heater. The guy that came to work on the water heater started asking me political questions. And he started giving me, and this is just a working class guy, and he started giving me right-wing talking points, just one after another. It was really interesting. We had a nice conversation, but each time it was like, well, if the Democrats are so liberal, why is AOC taking a private jet? That seems pretty hypocritical. I'm like, what does that have to do with anything? He's like, well, don't you think we should protect our food safety? Isn't that what RFK Jr. is going to do? I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, they just defunded farm to schools. This guy is not a product. His thinking is not a product of what Democrats are or aren't doing. He's not a product of what Democrats are or aren't saying. He is a product of what information is reaching him. He is a product of media apparatus. He's a product of algorithms. That's what his views are a product of. And we have to think more broadly, think more deeply. We have to have a recruitment-based strategy, not just what angle do we point strategy. We got to go speed round, Beth, because there are a lot of people waiting patiently. But thanks for your call.
Yes. Okay.
Appreciate you. Calvin, you got like 30 seconds. You're on the air.
Don't know if I got it 30 seconds worth, but I wanted to bring up Mark Twain's piece called A War Prayer, written about 1905.
All right.
Every time I hear somebody bringing God into winning for their side, even if they're the guy who's the aggressor, I always think back to Mark Twain and the war prayer, his war prayer.
Well, I appreciate that, and it's longer than I can read on the air right now. But it's a good thing, and I bet it'll end up in Sue's stack. Thank you so much. Let's go to Mike from Baltimore. You got, I think, probably our last caller before the break.
Hi, Jefferson. I appreciate the call. This whole issue about moderate Democrat versus liberal Democrat. I mean, I don't get it. Like, what is liberal about wanting, health care for all, or housing as a human right, or supporting unions, or like having a fair immigration system? I think you mentioned trying to protect the planet from climate change. Yeah. Women's rights. I don't understand why, this whole moderate versus liberal thing is making me crazy.
I hear you, and that's why. And I think it is it's not only a tool of oppression, it's a tool of distraction, it's a tool of manipulation, it's a tool of propaganda, that we get people to self-identify their politics and then think their view should come from that. Let's figure out what the key problems are and how we can work together to solve those problems. Let's build political movements to solve those problems rather than faking ideas to survive all the ideology.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be right back with your calls and Big Finish. Thom Hartmann Show. Hot Joe. Dave from San Pedro, California. You are on the air.
Yeah, hi, Jefferson. I'm thankful today that it's VE Day, the 80th anniversary of VE Day and the victory over Hitler, at least. And I wanted to, my poor words for thankfulness for the troops that accomplished all that are very poor. So I'm going to point people towards a radio show that FDR commissioned just before the end of the war. It's called On a Note of Triumph. It's easily you Google it in YouTube and like that, and it's about an hour long. It's a wonderful dramatization of all the trials and tribulations of the war. And the last closing benediction, about 2 minutes worth, is actually a wonderful piece, a wonderful bit of writing that I do as a spoken word piece. It's very inspirational.
Appreciate that very much, and we can share that, and I'll bet you it's in Sue's stack. And I'm not doing X as much these days, but if you want to hit me, I'm Jefferson Smith on Blue Sky. If anybody wants to tag me there, share something with me there, and I can take a look at it, maybe share it as well. Thank you, David.
Yeah.
Let's go to Joy from Marion, Illinois. It rhymes.
Hello, Jefferson.
Hello.
I love your show.
Oh, thanks.
And when the man called in to sort of, tear down the Democrats, saying they were too liberal, well, I don't want to have a label. I just want policies that are liberal. And I know people get hung up because they don't like the Democrats talking about trans people, even though they exist. But just put that aside. And the big thing we need equality, and we'll never have it if the rich aren't taxed. And the Democrats are just as bad as making that happen as the Republicans, almost. But to have equality, to get people off the streets, to eliminate hunger among our people, we've got to tax the rich. And there's nothing wrong with that. They use all the services we do, and they make oodles of money. And it is really just revolting that they can't pay their way with all the money they make. We need, this is my point.
I appreciate it very much, Joy, and I'll respond. And thanks for calling from Illinois, which I sometimes pronounce Illinois. But you are Joy, not Joie.
I'm Joy.
Okay, so I don't rhyme. So I go another way.
Illinois.
Okay. Appreciate you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. So here's what I'd say. It's we've got to communicate and fight on all fronts. I think very rarely have people won arguments. It's pretty hard to win arguments, actually, and persuade a particular person by arguing. It's pretty hard to win an argument without some level of empathy. It's pretty hard to win an argument without some level of acknowledging not only the humanity, but elements of perspective of the person you're talking to. Just saying, here's why you're wrong, and here's why what you believe in is wrong, hard to win that argument. It's also hard to win an argument if all you do is retreat. If all you do is say, I'm going to shy away from the word liberal, I'm going to shy away from the word progressive, I'm going to shy away from the most important virtues, most important values, most important principles, that you got to stand for something, you're going to stand for nothing. We've got to be willing to let our values fly, as well as have a recruitment philosophy. We're back.
Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. Back in 1968, when Lyndon Johnson was president, Earl Warren resigned from the Supreme Court. He was a liberal, even though he had been appointed by Eisenhower. Johnson wasn't able to replace him, in part because of Republican opposition in the Senate. And so when Nixon came in, he had this opening, but he wanted to have two openings. He wanted to get rid of Abe Fortas, who was the most liberal member of the court. So he had his Attorney General, John Mitchell, start an investigation into Abe Fortas's wife. Now, there was nothing there. There was no smoke at all. She had done absolutely nothing wrong, and history has proven that. But they were going to drag her before a grand jury and possibly before Congress and just, drag her through the mud. And this caused Abe Fortas to resign, and that gave Nixon two openings, and that's how the court turned to the right. I'm suggesting that Democrats should do the same thing with Justice Thomas. I've got an op-ed about it at Hartmann Report. You can read it over there. Check it out.
All right. We've got just a minute. If everybody goes 20 seconds, we can get to the big finish. Dave from Warren, speed round. We're almost at the end of the show. Go ahead.
Yeah, a bit off the subject, but I want to talk about this invisible line that Trump keeps talking.
Got like 20 seconds?
Yeah, isn't there anyone on his staff that can tell him that that's the 49th parallel and that was agreed to by a treaty with Britain?
There are fewer people on his staff that could tell him that, wish there were, and there are fewer people with the courage to do so, and he might not care even if they did. Tom from Bremerton, Washington, you are on there. You win the Most Patient Listener Award.
Hey, so I just wanted to highlight something that you talked about countermeasures, and by the way, I love the fighter jet reference. Yeah, it's just very important to realize that all the spewing garbage rhetoric by the Trump administration and the greater Trump group of anti-woke, anti-DEI, the whole Gulf of America thing, that's all a distraction. It's all a smokescreen from their true goal, which is a consolidation of absolute power into the hands of the 1% of the 1%. That is their entire goal. Everything else is a distraction, and it's important for us as people to focus on that and realize that the 99%, regardless of where you stand on like civil issues, all have that in common, that they are standing in opposition to that consolidation of power by that group.
Tom,
and
I
that's all I'll say today. Thank you very much.
I appreciate the call. And Diane, who wanted to put a plug in for Healthcare for All, I have to do that plug for you because this show is about to wrap up. And what I have time to do is say thank you. I do think that our callers, as they tend to be, are onto something. That part of my challenge of the modern right wing is that its primary objectives, the MAGA movement, its primary objective is power itself. Power for its allies, power for its funders, and power for the richest and most powerful who already have power. As distinct from solving a problem, whether that problem is climate change, whether that problem is protecting the middle class, whether that problem is democracy itself, whether that problem is education, poverty, it's power itself. You are the coalition of benevolently irrational, the good people doing good things for no good reason, not just power itself, and you are priceless. Definition of priceless, worth a lot, not for sale. And with you, democracy has a chance. Thanks for letting me be with you. Tom will be back with you tomorrow. And thank you so much. Be well.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!